You ever wonder why you randomly laugh at the worst moments, or why you say you're fine, when clearly you're not? Here's the wild part: your brain has been playing defense this whole time. Quietly, constantly, and most of us don't even realize it. We're talking about psychological defense mechanisms, those sneaky, brilliant ways your mind protects you from overwhelm, shame, grief, stress, you name it. And the thing is, they're not just for psych majors or therapy rooms. They're happening right now. While you're watching this, maybe you've caught yourself replaying a breakup like it's a movie. Or maybe you're the kind of person who jokes through pain so no one sees the cracks. Yeah, those moves. They're not random, they're strategies. And once you learn to spot them, you'll start to understand why you think the way you do, why people act the way they act. And maybe, just maybe, you'll sleep a little easier tonight. So, settle in. Dim the lights. You're about to hear 3 hours of the most fascinating, eye-opening, slightly uncomfortable truths about the human mind. But don't worry, we'll take it slow. And by the end, you might just see yourself a little more clearly. But before that, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. It's amazing how we're all connected, each of us chasing that perfect night's sleep. If this resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Restwise, and join the journey. Now, get comfy and let the psychological defense mechanisms guide you into a peaceful sleep. Let's begin. Projection. You ever meet someone and instantly feel irritated, like no reason you can explain, but they just bother you? Maybe they're loud. Maybe they're flaky. Maybe they're just a little too confident. And something in you goes, "Aw, I can't with this person." But what if that feeling wasn't really about them? What if what's driving you crazy is actually something you haven't faced in yourself? Yeah, welcome to projection, one of the oldest tricks in the psychological defense playbook. It's like your mind is running an emotional shell game, moving uncomfortable feelings off your table and putting them in someone else's hands. Here's the basic idea. When a thought or feeling feels too threatening, your brain goes, "Nope, not mine," and pins it on someone else. It's not a lie. It's not you being fake. It's literally your psyche trying to offload tension it doesn't know how to deal with. Let's say you pride yourself on being loyal, and then you catch yourself feeling drawn to someone outside your relationship. Nothing happens, but even that flicker of interest feels like a betrayal. Instead of acknowledging it, your mind goes, "I bet my partner's being shady. Something feels off." Boom. That's projection. Or maybe someone seems arrogant and it grates on you. But what if, underneath, you've been suppressing your own need to be seen? You've been taught to stay humble, stay small, so their boldness feels like an insult, when really, it's a reflection of what you secretly want. Freud coined the term. Of course he did, and he called projection a primitive defense. Not because it's bad, but because it's something the brain pulls out early, instinctively. It's often unconscious. You don't realize you're doing it until you zoom out. And it's not just about feelings we don't like. We also project positive traits. Ever put someone on a pedestal? Swear they were perfect. That's projection too. Pouring your own ideals into someone else's shape. This works in all directions. That person who annoys you for being too emotional. Could be you've been stuffing down your own feelings. That friend who's so fake. Maybe you've been people-pleasing and resenting it. That coworker who seems lazy. Maybe you're burned out yourself, but won't admit it. It's kind of trippy when you think about it. We walk around the world, bumping into versions of ourselves we've projected onto other people. Sometimes like shadows, sometimes like mirrors. And here's where it gets really real. Projection doesn't just strain relationships. It warps reality. It makes it harder to see people as they actually are, because you're looking at them through the lens of your own unprocessed emotions. There's even research on this. A 2011 study published in Psychological Science found that people are more likely to project their own traits onto others when they're stressed or under cognitive load. Translation: when your brain is fried, it defaults to shortcuts, including making other people carry your mental baggage. But once you learn to spot it, everything changes. Next time you're judging someone harshly, try pausing and asking, what part of me is reacting here? Is this really about them, or am I projecting something I'm afraid to own? It doesn't mean the other person's behavior is great. Maybe they are rude or selfish, but checking for projection is like cleaning the lens you're looking through, so you're reacting from clarity, not just defense. Here's a personal example, because this stuff gets intimate real fast. I had a friend I used to complain about constantly. They're so dramatic. Everything's a crisis with them. But one day, in therapy, my therapist asked, "What's your relationship with your own emotions?" And I froze, because the truth, I don't let myself break down. I keep it together. Always. And maybe I hated their drama because it reminded me of the parts of myself I don't give permission to feel. That hit hard. But it also opened a door. Because when you stop outsourcing your discomfort, you start reclaiming parts of yourself you've been avoiding. And weirdly, the world feels less hostile. So here's the takeaway: projection is your brain trying to protect your self-image. But if you're willing to lean into it, if you're willing to ask, what's this really about? You'll start seeing patterns. And those patterns, that's where healing begins. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about understanding yourself. The parts of you you've ignored don't go away. They just find new costumes. Until you're ready to say, "Hey, I see you now." Now that we've faced the mirror, let's talk about what happens when your pain finds a more creative outlet. Sublimation. Okay. So what do you do when your emotions are just too much? When your anger's hot enough to burn bridges? When your heartbreak doesn't fit into a single sob session? When your grief feels like it could take you under if you let it? Here's what most of us don't realize: we don't always suppress those feelings. Sometimes we transform them. That's sublimation. It's the psychological alchemy of turning emotional chaos into something useful, constructive, even beautiful. It's your brain saying, "I don't know what to do with this feeling, so let me pour it into something else." And the result: a painting, a poem, a song, a workout, a late night cleaning spree, a business even. Anything that gives the emotion a place to live outside your body. Think about it. The most haunting music, written from heartbreak. The most powerful speeches, fueled by rage. The most breathtaking art, born from grief. Sublimation is what makes that possible. Here's what makes this defense mechanism so special. It doesn't deny the feeling. It doesn't push it down. It redirects it. In Freud's original theory, sublimation was the gold standard. He saw it as the most mature of all the defense mechanisms, because it channels uncomfortable impulses into actions that are socially acceptable or even admirable. Like, imagine someone with a ton of aggression issues. Instead of picking fights or bottling it up, they take up boxing. They train hard, get disciplined, release that energy in the ring. That's not just coping. That's sublimation. Or someone who's been through deep trauma and writes a novel that cracks people open. That's not a story. That's emotional repurposing. And it doesn't have to be high art. Sublimation is everywhere. That guy who jogs 6 miles every time he's pissed at the world, he's not just exercising. He's metabolizing rage. That woman who cleans obsessively when life feels out of control. She's not just tidying. She's trying to make sense of chaos. That friend who volunteers every weekend after a breakup. They're not just being kind. They're soothing their pain through service. Even humor can be a form of sublimation, making jokes about the thing that hurts, but in a way that connects instead of isolates. Though that leans into another defense we'll get to later. There's a quiet brilliance to sublimation, because instead of fighting your emotions or dumping them on someone else, you work with them. You make them productive. But here's the thing, you don't always realize you're doing it. Let's say someone grows up in a house full of conflict, shouting, tension, emotional whiplash. As they get older, instead of becoming reactive, they turn that intensity inward and start writing short stories, dramas, thrillers, anything with emotional weight. It's not just fiction. It's processing. It's taking what was once uncontrollable and giving it structure. Psychologically, sublimation allows impulses from the id, those raw, primal drives, to pass through the ego's filter and come out in a way that's not just safe, but sometimes genius. It's creativity born from survival. And here's where it gets powerful. You don't need to be an artist to sublimate. You just need an outlet. Maybe you journal your rage. Maybe you redesign your room after a breakup. Maybe you scream into a guitar, bake at 2 a.m., start a new project you never thought you had the energy for. That's your psyche doing its thing. It's wild how often we see this in history. Van Gogh painted his way through depression and isolation. Frida Kahlo turned physical pain into surreal beauty. Nina Simone wove racial injustice into soul-piercing music. These weren't just creators. They were survivors, turning storms into something the world could hold. And the best part, sublimation doesn't hurt anyone. It doesn't destroy relationships. It doesn't damage you. It builds. It releases. It restores. But there's a subtle catch. Sublimation is easy to confuse with avoidance. Sometimes we stay too busy, turn everything into productivity, grieve through work, process pain by staying creative all the time. So the key is this: sublimation works best when it's intentional. When you're aware, I'm feeling something heavy. Let me give it somewhere to go. You don't need to turn it into a masterpiece. You just need to let it move. Through movement or music, or anything that keeps you from getting stuck. Because emotions aren't meant to be trapped. They're meant to flow. And sublimation, that's the flow. So next time you feel like you're about to crack, ask yourself, what can I make out of this? That's not denial. That's power. Now, let's explore what happens when the mind decides to leave reality completely. Dissociation. Have you ever driven somewhere and couldn't remember how you got there? Or sat through a conversation, nodding and smiling, but you weren't really there? That's dissociation. And no, it's not just zoning out. It's your mind quietly pulling you out of reality on purpose. Let's say it this way: if emotions are too loud, if the pain is too sharp, if the experience is too overwhelming, dissociation is your brain's emergency exit, a temporary escape hatch. It's not malfunction, it's protection. See, dissociation shows up when the present moment feels unsafe. The body's there, but the mind steps away, like a fog rolls in between you and your life. It's your psyche whispering, "This is too much. Let me turn the volume down for a bit." At its core, dissociation is a disconnection from your thoughts, your memories, your feelings, even your own body. It's a spectrum, really. Sometimes it's subtle. You stare at a wall for 10 minutes and forget time passed. You laugh with friends but feel weirdly detached. You feel like you're floating above your own life, watching from a distance. Other times, it's intense. You lose chunks of time. You forget parts of your past. You feel like you're not real, or the world isn't. For people with trauma histories, especially childhood trauma or chronic abuse, dissociation can become the default setting. When you can't physically leave a situation, your mind learns to leave mentally. It's a survival mechanism, a shield. And here's where it gets interesting: dissociation isn't always visible from the outside. You might look totally fine, calm, put together, high functioning, but inside, you're somewhere else entirely. There's even a name for one version of this: depersonalization, where you feel disconnected from yourself, like your body isn't yours, like you're observing your life, not living it. Then there's derealization, where the world around you feels unreal, blurry, like a dream you can't quite wake up from. And if dissociation becomes severe and persistent, it can lead to something called dissociative identity disorders, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. But for most people, it doesn't go that far. It stays in these manageable, fragmented pockets of disconnection. Let's anchor this with a real life example. Imagine a kid growing up in a household where shouting is constant and physical punishment is common. They can't leave. They can't fight back. So their brain does something remarkable. It detaches. When the yelling starts, they drift. They imagine they're somewhere else. Over time, this becomes automatic. As an adult, any intense emotional situation triggers that same response: drift away, disappear, go numb. But here's the thing: that strategy worked back then. It kept them safe. It was brilliant even. The problem is, now they're 30, in a relationship, trying to be present, and every time conflict arises, they vanish inside themselves again. That's the cost of dissociation. You lose pain, yes, but sometimes you lose joy, too, because when you numb one emotion, you often numb them all. And yet, here's the gentle truth: dissociation isn't brokenness. It's intelligence. It's your mind doing what it had to do to protect you. The goal isn't to fix it. The goal is to understand it, to notice when you're drifting, to gently bring yourself back. There are small, science-backed ways to do that. Grounding techniques help. Splash cold water on your face. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. Carry a stone or small object in your pocket to touch when you feel far away. Even mindfulness practices, like slow breathing or guided meditations, can slowly teach your brain that it's safe to stay present, that you don't need to run anymore. Therapists, especially those trained in trauma work like EMDR or somatic therapies, are trained to help with dissociation. They work with you to build what's called a window of tolerance. That space where you can feel your feelings without getting overwhelmed by them, because being present in your life, really here, is a skill. And if you've had to dissociate to survive, relearning that skill takes time, gentleness, and practice. But you can do it. You can reclaim your timeline. Reconnect with your body. Remember what it feels like to feel safe and stay. And just like that, the fog begins to lift. So if you've ever wondered why you space out, why you go numb, why you feel disconnected when things get intense, it's not weakness. It's history. It's wiring. It's defense. And now, you're starting to bring it into the light. Next, let's talk about what happens when you refuse to believe something's real at all, even when it's staring you in the face. Denial, sometimes the truth is just too big, too sudden, too painful, too real. So what do? We close the door. We shut the blinds. We say, nope, that's not real. That's not happening. I'm fine. And just like that, welcome to denial, the psychological equivalent of putting your fingers in your ears and humming loudly. But don't get it twisted. Denial isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always look like someone yelling, F.A. Canublis, at reality. Sometimes it's quiet, soft, a whisper to yourself, I'm not upset, I'm just tired, or they didn't mean it, or it's not that bad. Denial isn't lying, not really. It's more like self-protective storytelling. It's your mind drawing the curtains when the light is too bright. Because truth, in its rawest form, can hurt. And when we're not ready for it, emotionally, mentally, even physically, our brains offer us a little buffer. And that buffer, it's denial. Now, at its best, denial gives you time. Time to process, time to adjust, time to breathe before the emotional wave hits. Like when someone you love passes away and, for a few days, it doesn't feel real. You still expect them to walk through the door. Your brain hasn't caught up with your heart yet. That's denial working gently. It's graceful denial, but at its worst, denial becomes a wall. A thick, unmovable wall between you and healing. Imagine this, you're in a toxic relationship. The red flags are there. The gaslighting, the disrespect, the constant anxiety in your gut. But every time your friends bring it up, you say, no, it's not like that. You don't know them like I do. That's not love. That's denial with mascara on. Or someone gets a serious health diagnosis, but they ignore it. Refuse treatment. Don't tell anyone. They say, if I don't talk about it, it'll go away. That's not optimism. That's denial with a nervous smile. And here's the kicker, we all do it. Even the most self-aware people deny things they're not ready to face. Why? Because the human brain is wired for survival. And sometimes, the truth threatens that survival. Not physically, but emotionally. Freud called denial one of the earliest defense mechanisms to show up. It's primitive, foundational, babies use it. Children live in it. Adults refine it. And in some situations, denial isn't just useful, it's essential. Think about first responders, ER doctors, trauma therapists. They often have to function in high-stakes situations where emotions could derail them, so they compartmentalize, block certain things out. Tell themselves they're okay, just to get through the moment. That's situational denial. It serves a purpose. It protects function. But over time, if you never let reality in, that wall becomes a cage. You stop feeling. You stop evolving. You stop healing. Denial is like emotional Novocaine. It numbs the pain, sure, but it also numbs you. And sometimes denial wears disguises sarcasm. Oh yeah, I'm totally falling apart. Haha, just kidding. So not really, buzzy-ness. I don't have time to deal with this right now. A toxic positivity. Everything happens for a reason, even when it absolutely didn't need to. And those forms of denial, sneaky, socially accepted, even rewarded. But underneath them, still pain, still truth, still something waiting to be seen. The path out of denial isn't immediate. It's not about forcing yourself to face everything at once. It starts with noticing. Noticing the places you avoid, the feelings you stuff down, the situations you rationalize because the truth is just too sharp. And then, slowly, gently, letting a little light in, asking, what would it mean if I did admit this to myself? What am I afraid I'll feel if I stop pretending? What am I trying to protect? Those questions crack the wall, and through those cracks healing can begin. In therapy, denial is often the first thing to work through. Because until you acknowledge the truth, nothing else moves. But it doesn't have to be dramatic. It can look like crying for the first time in months. Calling a friend and saying, "Hey, I think I'm actually not okay." Or even just writing something down you've never said out loud. That's how denial softens. Not through force, but through readiness. So if you've been living in a reality that feels off, where the facts don't line up with the story you're telling yourself, you're not broken. You're protecting yourself. But maybe now, you're ready to see more, to feel more, to be more. And when you are, denial doesn't disappear. It just steps aside. Let's talk next about what happens when our minds pull us even further back in time, to a version of us we thought we outgrew. Regression. Have you ever been in an argument with someone, maybe your partner, maybe your boss, and suddenly you feel like a child again? Not metaphorically, like literally. You're pouting, you're retreating. You want to slam a door or crawl under a blanket or yell, "You never listened to me," with the same intensity you did at age 7. That's regression. It's what happens when the adult version of you hands the wheel to your inner child and lets them drive for a while. Regression is the psychological equivalent of comfort food. It's emotional time travel back to a version of you that felt safer, smaller, or maybe just simpler. But here's the kicker: you usually don't choose to regress. It just happens. When stress hits, when life gets loud, when pressure mounts or conflict rises, boom, you're 10 years old again. Why? Because when we feel overwhelmed, emotionally, mentally, or even physically, the brain doesn't always lean into logic. It leans into memory and the earliest strategies we ever learned to deal with pain. Those were created way before we had adult vocabulary, adult reasoning, or adult coping skills. So sometimes, when life shakes us, we don't step up, we shrink down. And it's not just tantrums or mood swings. Regression can show up in really subtle ways. Passive neediness, suddenly needing reassurance for every little thing. Baby talk, yep, even that, cutesy voice. Some people use under stress. Avoidance, like staying in bed all day, watching cartoons, and pretending bills don't exist. Dependency, craving someone to fix it for you instead of solving it yourself. And sometimes, it's even physical. Stress can make people curl up into a ball, rock back and forth, or crave old comfort stuffed animals, childhood snacks, their mom's voice on the phone. Sound familiar? None of this is weird. None of it is weak. It's actually kinda brilliant. Regression is your mind's way of saying, "Hey, adulting is too much right now. Let's go back to a time when someone else took care of us, when life was simple, when our job was just to exist." And yeah, sometimes it looks a little immature. Sometimes it confuses people. But it's not bad. It's adaptive. Psychologists describe regression as one of the ego defense mechanisms we fall back on under stress, especially when the present moment mirrors something unresolved from the past. In fact, some therapeutic models, like inner child work encourage a conscious return to those early states, not to stay there, but to reconnect, understand, and heal. Because here's the wild part often, the version of you that shows up in moments of regression. That's the part that didn't get what it needed back then. It's not just acting out. It's asking for something. Maybe safety, maybe attention, maybe someone to say, it's okay to feel that way. So when you regress, it's not about being childish. It's about being human. Let's look at an example. Say someone grew up in a home where conflict meant danger. Raised voices meant things would escalate. So now, as an adult, even the slightest tension makes them freeze up. They shut down. They can't articulate what they need. They feel like a kid trapped in a grown-up body. That's not random. That's regression. And it's wired into their nervous system. Another example. Imagine someone under extreme work pressure, deadlines, expectations, burnout. Instead of pushing through, they go home, wrap up in a blanket burrito, binge, watch cartoons, and eat cereal for dinner. That's regression too. Their body is reaching for comfort, familiarity, a time when the world didn't expect anything from them. And again, it's okay. But the trick isn't to stay there, it's to recognize it, to notice the signs. Wow, I feel like I'm 6 years old right now. Why do I want to hide under the covers instead of answering this email? What am I really needing in this moment? And then, gently, come back to yourself. Sometimes it helps to self-soothe in healthy ways. Hug a pillow. Talk to your inner child like a loving parent. Say out loud, I'm safe now. I've got you. Sometimes it helps to journal what that younger version of you is trying to say. Or even draw them. Visualize them. Listen to them. Regression doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're trying to feel safe. And the more compassion you give that part of you, the more gracefully you'll return to your grown-up self. Because that child in you, they're not gone. They live in your reactions, your fears, your longings. But now you're the adult. You get to be who they needed. You get to take the wheel again. Next up, let's explore a defense mechanism that doesn't retreat. It smiles. But underneath that grin, there's heat. Passive aggression. You ever had someone say, it's fine? But the way they say it, you just know it's absolutely, definitely not fine. That's passive aggression. It's the emotional equivalent of throwing a punch, but in a velvet glove. See, when people are direct with anger, it's obvious. They yell. They argue. They tell you exactly what's bothering them, but passive aggression, it plays a quieter game. It's anger on mute. Instead of confrontation, it uses side doors. Sarcasm, silent treatment, subtle digs disguised as compliments, delays, forgetfulness, accidents that feel just a little too convenient. It's when someone's mad, but they've been taught, or trained, or told that being openly mad is bad. So instead, the anger leaks out sideways. Let's say your roommate never does their dishes. You're frustrated. But instead of saying, hey, this bothers me, you scrub everything extra loud, bang a few pots around, maybe even leave a note that says, some people wash their dishes zine. That's not problem solving. That's passive aggression in action. Or you're dating someone who's late. A lot. So instead of bringing it up, you just start showing up late too. No discussion, just quiet retaliation. Again, classic passive aggression. It's not always malicious. It's not always even conscious. Sometimes it's the only way someone ever learned to express hurt or anger. Because in a lot of homes, anger wasn't allowed. People were punished for raising their voice. Taught that being Good means being quiet. Told, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So guess what happens? That frustration doesn't disappear. It goes underground. Passive aggression is what happens when someone wants to scream, "I'm not okay." But instead, they smile politely and say, "Whatever you want is fine." It's communication in disguise. And the disguise can be very convincing. It can sound like, "No worries if you can't do it. I just thought you cared. I didn't think it was that important to you." I guess some of us are just more considerate than others. That sting you feel. That's the aggression part. And here's the tricky bit: passive aggression gives people plausible deniability. You can't always prove it's intentional. So when you call it out, they might say, "What? I didn't mean anything by that." Which makes you second guess yourself. Did you overreact? Are you being too sensitive? Nope. You're probably just being gaslit by a smile. And let's be honest. We've all done it. It's sneaky. It's tempting. Because it lets you feel like you've won a conflict without ever actually having won. But here's the thing. It doesn't resolve anything. It just keeps things festering beneath the surface. Psychologically, passive aggression is a defense mechanism because it protects us from two uncomfortable things: the vulnerability of expressing anger openly, the fear of conflict or rejection that might follow. It's a compromise, but not a healthy one. And long term, it erodes relationships. Friends start walking on eggshells. Partners stop talking openly. Co-workers start assuming every "sure, no problem" is laced with resentment. Passive aggression might feel safer in the short term, but in the long term, it's corrosive. Now, what does it look like in real life? A partner who says they're fine, but punishes you with cold shoulders. A co-worker who agrees to help with a task, but forgets. Again, a friend who makes jokes at your expense, then laughs and says, "I'm just teasing, relax, duh." And yeah, sometimes we are the ones doing it. So how do you catch it in yourself? Start by asking, am I saying one thing, but hoping someone picks up on something I'm not saying out loud? If yes, that's a sign. Another question: am I trying to avoid confrontation by making them feel guilty instead? That's another big clue. And the antidote? It's not exploding. It's not getting dramatic. It's honest, clear, direct communication. It's saying things like, "I felt hurt when you didn't text me back. I'd like your help with this, but I'm frustrated I had to ask again. I don't feel okay right now. Can we talk about it?" Yes, that takes courage. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but the payoff, it's connection, clarity, peace. And here's the truth: your anger is valid. Your needs are valid. But how you express them determines whether you build bridges or burn them. Passive aggression gives the illusion of power, but real power, it's when you can say the hard thing with softness. When you can show your hurt without hiding it behind sarcasm or silence. So next time you feel that familiar clench in your jaw, that urge to play it cool while low-key making someone feel bad, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, what do I really need to say right now? Because when you trade gritted teeth for open words, something beautiful happens. You stop managing the relationship and start participating in it. Coming up next: fantasy. Escape into worlds where your problems don't follow. Because sometimes the mind doesn't want to fight, it just wants to fly away. Fantasy. Have you ever caught yourself zoning out, daydreaming about a completely different life? Like, in your head, You're not sitting in traffic anymore. You're on a secluded beach, sipping something cold, with zero responsibilities. Or maybe you just aced that job interview you haven't even applied for yet. Or your crush finally noticed you, in exactly the way you imagined. Feels kinda good, right? That's fantasy, not the dragons and wizards kind, but the kind that lives in our heads when reality feels just a little too heavy. Psychologically, fantasy is one of the most elegant defense mechanisms. Because when life gets too much, when the stress, the rejection, the powerlessness builds up, fantasy becomes a secret portal, a private retreat, a world where you control the narrative. And it's not just some quirky thing we do. It's deeply wired into the brain. The same areas of the brain that light up during memory recall also activate when we imagine things that haven't happened yet. So when we fantasize, our mind feels like it's experiencing that world, even if our body's still sitting in bed, under dim lights, trying to ignore tomorrow's to-do list. Now, fantasy shows up in all sorts of flavors. Sometimes it's heroic. You imagine standing up for yourself in a situation where you stayed quiet. You replay it in your head, but this time you win. Sometimes it's romantic. You picture that text from someone who ghosted you finally saying they miss you, and you get to ignore it. Sometimes it's pure escapism. You imagine quitting your job, moving to Italy, opening a bookstore, and never looking at Slack again. And all of this, totally normal. Fantasy helps us cope. It gives us control in moments when we feel powerless. It gives us hope in situations that feel hopeless, especially for people who didn't grow up in safe environments. Fantasy can be a literal survival tool. When the world outside was unpredictable, the world inside became a sanctuary. But here's where it gets interesting. Fantasy walks a fine line between comfort and avoidance, because while it helps us process emotions, it can also help us avoid feeling them. Or worse, avoid dealing with them. If you're always escaping into what could be, you might miss what is, and sometimes fantasy can keep us stuck. Like someone who imagines the perfect relationship, so no one in real life ever measures up, or someone who keeps dreaming about a future career, but never takes that terrifying first step. The fantasy becomes safer than the action. And the brain, it's cool with that. It's happy to loop you through a dopamine drip of imagined wins, no risk required. But here's the truth: fantasy should be a refuge, not a residence. A place you visit, not a place you live. So how do you use fantasy well? Start by noticing when it shows up. Is it a tool to dream and recharge? Or a shield to avoid and disconnect? You can even ask yourself, what am I fantasizing about that I'm afraid to pursue in real life? What emotion am I escaping right now? Is it fear, sadness, boredom? If this fantasy were a message, what would it be trying to tell me about what I need? Because behind every fantasy is a real longing. The beach fantasy might be your mind begging for rest. The love story might be a desire to feel seen. The quitting your job dream could be pointing toward a boundary that needs setting, or a career that's quietly breaking your spirit. And hey, fantasy has power. Real power. It's not just indulgent daydreaming. It's a blueprint. Some of the world's best art, inventions, and revolutions started as someone's internal fantasy. Fantasy can be a first draft of the life you want, before you have the words to speak it or the courage to try it. But the key, use it consciously. Let it be your safe space, not your hiding place. And if you ever find yourself stuck in fantasy, unable to return to the present, try grounding yourself. Touch something cold or textured. Count 5 things you can see around you. Take 3 deep breaths and remind yourself, I'm here, I'm safe, I can dream, but I don't have to disappear. Because reality may be messy, but it's also where change happens, where growth lives, where connection waits, and fantasy. It'll always be there, a soft place to land when you need a break. But don't forget to come back. The life you want might not be in your head, but it starts because of it. Identification with the aggressor. You ever hear someone say, I promised I'd never be like them, and then became exactly that? Yeah, that's not just irony. That's a defense mechanism. It's called identification with the aggressor, and it's one of the most psychologically complex ways we cope with fear, shame, and powerlessness. It's what happens when you internalize the traits of someone who once intimidated, hurt, or controlled you, not because you want to, but because your mind thinks it's safer that way. Sounds twisted, right? But on a deep, unconscious level, it's actually a survival strategy. Let's go back for a second. Imagine being a child in a home where one parent is always angry, loud, critical, maybe even violent. You feel powerless, scared. You can't stop the behavior. You can't escape it. So your mind does something clever and strange. It starts thinking, if I act like them, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I won't be the target. Maybe I'll get some control back. And so, piece by piece, you take on their traits. The sharp tone, the sarcasm, the cold distance. You go from fearing the monster to becoming a little like it. Not out of choice, but out of self-protection. It's like your psyche whispers, if you can't beat them, be them, and maybe they'll leave you alone. And this doesn't just apply to childhood. It shows up in workplaces, in relationships, in social groups. Say you had a boss who humiliated you in meetings. Later, you find yourself doing the same thing to someone else, but you frame it as tough love, or maybe you were bullied in school. Now, years later, you catch yourself mocking people behind their backs to avoid feeling weak or exposed again. You don't even realize it's happening, because identification is sneaky. It works beneath the surface. It says, don't be the scared one. Don't be the one they pick on. Be the one they fear, and you won't get hurt again. Here's an eerie example. Some survivors of abuse, especially children, will start mimicking the abuser's language, mannerisms, even worldviews, not because they agree, but because mirroring them feels safer than opposing them. It's what trauma psychologist Anna Freud, Sigmund's daughter, originally described as identifying with the threat in order to reduce anxiety. Basically, if you can't run and you can't fight, your brain picks a third option, join. But here's the heartbreaking part. When you identify with the aggressor, you don't just adopt their power, you absorb their pain, too. The cruelty, the control, the emotional shutdown, it all becomes a part of you. And over time, you can lose touch with who you were before the fear. So, how do you spot this in yourself? Ask, do I use control to feel safe? Do I act in ways I once hated in others? Am I mimicking someone from my past? Not because I respect them, but because I'm scared not to. And most importantly, is this who I really am or who I became to survive? Because that distinction, that's where healing starts. If you've ever said, I don't like who I've become, you're not broken. You're probably just wearing armor that once protected you, but doesn't fit anymore. So what now? The first step is compassion. Not just for others, but for yourself. Because identifying with the aggressor doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. It means you did what you had to do when you didn't have better tools. And now, you get to choose. You get to peel back the layers. Ask yourself, whose voice is this really? Whose rules am I still living by? What version of me is underneath this fear? Therapists often help clients reclaim the self that got buried under all that defense. Because beneath the aggression, there's usually hurt. And under the hurt, there's usually a soft, scared part of you that still just wants to be safe, seen, and loved. Here's a wild but beautiful truth. The real you. You were never the villain. You just played a role to survive the scene. And now that you're older, now that you have more choices, you get to stop surviving and start living. You get to rewrite the story, not by denying what happened, but by deciding it doesn't get to define you anymore. So yeah, identification with the aggressor is heavy, but it's not permanent. It's reversible. It's healable. And it doesn't have to follow you into tomorrow. Breathe that in for a second. Displacement ever slammed a door after an argument, but not at the person you were actually mad at. Or snapped at your partner because of something your coworker said, or found yourself yelling at your dog because your day just sucked. That, right there, is displacement. The art of misplacing your emotions onto a safer, more convenient target. It's not petty. It's not random. It's psychological self-preservation. Here's the deal when we feel strong emotions, anger, frustration, even fear, and we can't express them toward the real source, maybe because it's unsafe, socially risky, or just too overwhelming. Our mind redirects that energy somewhere else, somewhere that feels safer. Let's say your boss humiliates you in a meeting. You can't yell at them. You can't walk out. So what do? You go home, and suddenly, that tiny thing your roommate did, leaving the dishes in the sink, sets you off. But you're not actually mad about the dishes. You're displacing the frustration, transferring it, redirecting it to a target that can't really fight back. Kids do this all the time. A child gets scolded by a teacher, can't say anything back, so they go and shove a classmate on the playground. Same mechanism, different stage. Displacement doesn't always show up as anger, though. It can be sadness, fear, anxiety. Anything too heavy to carry straight to the source. Sometimes we cry over a movie, when really we're grieving something else entirely. Sometimes we worry obsessively about something small, like being late, when what we're really afraid of is losing control of our life. Displacement is sneaky like that. It's your brain trying to express something without triggering danger. It's also one of the oldest psychological defense mechanisms. Freud talked about it way back, and not just Freud, for the sake of Freud. This one holds up, because here's the thing: our nervous systems, they're always scanning for threat, and when we're emotionally activated, but don't feel safe expressing it directly, our brains go, cool, let's reroute this to something less risky. So instead of confronting your passive-aggressive coworker, you rant about the traffic. Instead of addressing the loneliness you feel, you nitpick your partner's tone. Instead of facing your fear of failure, you obsess over your messy room. It feels like relief in the moment, but long-term, it builds up confusion, resentment, and disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself. You start reacting to symptoms, not causes. So how do you spot when you're displacing? Ask yourself, am I reacting in proportion to what just happened? Who or what am I really mad at right now? Is there someone I feel scared to confront? So I'm confronting something else instead. That self inquiry alone can break the loop. Because once you're aware of displacement, you can start choosing different responses. Let's say you're frustrated with a parent, but you know that conversation's a landmine. Instead of snapping at your partner, you name it. Hey, I'm feeling really irritated and I think it's left over from that call earlier. I don't want to take it out on you. A boom. Ownership, awareness, growth. Or maybe you're stressed from work and your instinct is to pick a fight with your sibling. You pause, take a breath, and say, I need a minute. I'm carrying a lot right now, and I don't want to dump it on you. That's not weakness. That's emotional fluency. And sometimes, just naming the real emotion calms it down. Because when feelings don't get acknowledged, they find a back door. But when they're seen, they don't have to sneak out sideways. Displacement can also show up physically. Ever notice how people will clench their jaw, pace, over-exercise, or fidget when they're overwhelmed emotionally? It's the body's way of handling misdirected tension. You might not even know what's wrong, just that you need to do something with the feeling. Here's a helpful journaling prompt. If this frustration could talk, what would it say, and to whom? Because sometimes, you're not just yelling at your phone or the dog or the dishes. You're yelling at a memory, a wound, a system that made you feel powerless. Displacement is the messenger, not the problem. The problem is unspoken emotion, and the solution is starting to speak it in ways that feel safe, honest, and real. You don't have to confront everyone who's ever hurt you, but you can stop taking it out on yourself or the people who love you. Even noticing the pattern is a win, because when you stop kicking the chair and start asking what the chair represents, you get closer to the root, and roots, that's where healing starts. So next time something small sets you off, pause. Ask yourself, what's the emotion and where does it really belong? You might be surprised by the answer. And that answer might just change the way you relate, not only to others, but to yourself. Repression. Let's get real for a second. There are things you've felt, things you've thought, things you've been through that you don't even remember. Not because they weren't important, but because your brain decided, no, we're not dealing with that right now. That's repression. The psychological equivalent of pushing a folder so far back into your mental filing cabinet that you forget it even existed. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's gone. Repression is your mind's way of protecting you from thoughts, memories, and emotions that feel too painful, too overwhelming, or too threatening to face consciously. We're talking trauma, shame, guilt, loss, rage, things that, in the moment, would have broken you. So your brain said, let's lock this up and toss the key. For now. It's kind of brilliant and kind of dangerous. Because while repression helps you survive a moment, it can hurt you long after that moment's over. Let's break it down. Imagine a kid who grows up in a chaotic household. Maybe one parent is emotionally absent or even abusive. That child might repress the memory of a specific event, a fight, a breakdown, a moment of deep fear. Not because they're lying to themselves, but because their brain literally buries it. Out of sight, out of conscious awareness. Fast forward 20 years. That same kid is now an adult who flinches at loud voices, avoids conflict, and gets anxious in emotionally intense situations, but doesn't know why. That's repression in action. The memory is gone from the front of your mind, but the impact is still living in your body, your triggers, your fears. sometimes even your relationship patterns. They might be echoing from things you've repressed. It's like your unconscious mind is whispering. We may not remember it, but we're still acting like it could happen again. Now, important note here. Repression is not the same as suppression. Suppression is when you choose to push something away. Like, I'll deal with that breakup later. I've got work to do. Repression, though, it's involuntary. It's automatic. You don't know it's happening until, maybe, something brings it back. A smell, a place, a conversation. And suddenly, you feel that tightness in your chest. That emotion you can't name. That's the shadow of a repressed memory surfacing. But here's what's wild. Sometimes people repress not just memories, but parts of themselves. Parts that felt wrong or too much to express. A boy told not to cry represses sadness. A girl told anger isn't ladylike represses rage. A kid laughed at for dreaming big represses ambition. These parts don't disappear. They just go underground, into what Jung called the shadow self, and eventually, those unacknowledged feelings leak out. In dreams, in anxieties, in habits we don't fully understand. Ever feel like you're overreacting, but don't know why? That might not be you overreacting. It might be something deeper resurfacing. A memory, a wound, a truth that's been in the dark too long. So what do we do with that? Well, first, we honor it. Because repression isn't something to feel ashamed of. It's something your mind did to protect you. It means, at some point, you were trying to stay safe. You weren't ready to feel it then. And that's okay. But maybe now you are. Therapists often use gentle techniques, like guided memory recall, inner child work, or somatic therapy, to help people safely explore what's been repressed. And no, this isn't about digging up every buried memory. It's about creating enough inner safety to let those memories surface on their own, if and when they're ready. Here's something to try. The next time you get triggered by something small, like a tone of voice or a scene in a movie, ask yourself, what does this remind me of? When was the first time I felt this way? You might not get an answer right away, but even asking the question starts to melt the ice, because that's what repression does. It freezes pain. But healing, that's the thaw. It's letting those frozen parts come back to life. Not all at once, not in a rush, but gently. And when you finally let one of those long, buried thoughts come into the light, it's not just about remembering. It's about reclaiming. It's about saying, that happened. I made it through, and I don't need to hide it anymore. So yeah, repression protects. But at some point, what once protected you can start limiting you. And when you're ready, shining a little light on those dark corners, that's where the real freedom begins. Now let's lighten the air just a bit, but stay deep. Rationalization. Ever made a decision you kind of knew wasn't great, and then immediately came up with a totally logical reason for why you did it? Like, I didn't want that job anyway. It's not even my vibe. Even though deep down you really did. You just didn't get it. Or, they weren't that into me. So ghosting them saved us both time. Even though you're still checking their profile at 2 a.m. That right there is rationalization. It's not lying. It's not being fake. It's your brain putting a spin on reality to protect you from how it really feels. And let's be honest, it's impressive. Because rationalization doesn't sound like a defense mechanism. It sounds smart, reasonable, like you've got it all figured out. But what it's actually doing, It's building a story around pain, so you don't have to feel it. Let's say you're passed over for a promotion. Instead of admitting how disappointed you are, or how unseen you feel, your mind goes, "That role had way too much responsibility anyway. I'd have been miserable." Now maybe that's true. But maybe, just maybe, it's a cover, a narrative, a soft landing. And that's what rationalization does best. It cushions your ego. It shields your emotions behind a wall of logic. Here's another one: you fail an exam. Your first reaction isn't sadness or frustration. It's, "Well, I wasn't even trying that hard. I knew I'd bomb it." Translation: you're distancing yourself from the pain of effort not being enough. Or how about this classic: someone breaks up with you and your mind goes, "Honestly, they were kind of emotionally immature. I dodged a bullet." Okay, maybe they were. But is that all you feel? Or are you using bullet dodging to sidestep the sting of rejection? Rationalization can also be sneaky in moral situations. Say you cheat a little on something, your taxes, a test, whatever, and you justify it with, "Everyone else is doing it. The system's broken anyway. It's not a big deal." Again, these thoughts aren't evil. They're just strategic. Because admitting, "I did something I'm not proud of," hurts. So instead, we reason our way out of guilt. We rebuild the narrative so we don't feel like the bad guy. And let's not forget, society low-key rewards this. We're told to stay positive, be rational, get over it, see the bright side. So when we feel something heavy, we often rush to explain it away before we've even let ourselves feel it. But here's the thing: emotions don't disappear just because we've rationalized them. They just get buried. And buried feelings don't stay buried forever. They show up as tension, as overreactions, as those weird moments when you're suddenly overwhelmed by something that shouldn't matter, because part of you knows the real reason, even if your conscious mind is still clinging to the script. Now, does that mean rationalization is always bad? Nope. Sometimes it's necessary. It gives us space, perspective, time to regulate. Like, if you're spiraling after a breakup, telling yourself, "This is probably for the best," can actually help you function. It's emotional triage. But if it becomes your only move, if you never acknowledge the sadness, the rejection, the fear underneath, then rationalization turns from emotional armor into emotional avoidance. So how do we work with it? Start by catching it. Ask, is this really how I feel? Or is this how I want to feel so I don't have to hurt? Am I telling a story that sounds smart but doesn't sit right in my gut? What would I say if I wasn't trying to justify this? You'll be surprised what comes up. Another cue. If you're explaining something a lot, like really going out of your way to make it sound okay, that might be a sign you're not okay with it at all. Here's a reframe that helps. Instead of saying, "It doesn't matter," try, "It mattered, and I'm figuring out how to carry it." Because that's the difference between rationalizing and processing. Rationalizing says, "This doesn't hurt because I made it make sense." Processing says, "This hurt, and I'm learning how to hold it with grace." One denies the wound. The other tends to it. And let's be real, tending to it, that's where growth lives. That's where your emotional depth comes from. That's how you stop repeating the same stories and start writing new ones. So yeah, rationalization is clever, but truth is brave. And when you start swapping emotional armor for emotional honesty, You don't just sound strong, you are strong. Intellectualization. Okay? So imagine this. You just went through something rough. A breakup, a loss, a rejection, a full-blown identity crisis. And instead of feeling the sadness, confusion, or fear, you dive into a TED Talk level analysis of why it happened. You see, it's actually quite simple. The psychological attachment style I developed in early childhood predisposed me to anxiously pursue emotionally unavailable partners, and this entire scenario is a predictable expression of that. Oh, okay, Sherlock. You're not wrong. But where's the part where you admit your heart is wrecked right now? That's intellectualization in action. It's when you take an emotional experience, something raw, something human, and you package it neatly in logic, theory, and analysis. Because if you can explain it, maybe you don't have to feel it. And let's be real, intellectualization feels productive. It feels smart. You're thinking things through. You're being rational. You're not spiraling. But deep down, there's a part of you whispering, I'm scared to feel this, so I'll study it instead. Let's say your parent dies. You go into full researcher mode. What are the stages of grief? What's the average recovery time for loss? Is it normal to not cry right away? All great questions, but you might be doing it not just to understand your pain, but to buffer yourself from it. Because grief is messy, emotional, uncontrollable, and analysis is clean, safe, predictable. So instead of letting the wave knock you over, you stand on the beach with a whiteboard. And here's where it gets sneaky. Intellectualization masquerades as self-awareness. You might be talking about your trauma in a supercomposed, articulate way, like a therapist's dream client. But there's no emotion in your voice, no pause, no shake, no vulnerability, just facts, just logic, just distance. It's like explaining a house fire while pretending you weren't inside it. Now, why do we do this? Because emotions are intense, and sometimes, especially if we grew up in homes where emotions weren't safe, we learn to survive by thinking instead of feeling. So instead of crying, we explain. Instead of grieving, we break it down. Instead of being in it, we hover above it. Here's an example. You're dumped out of nowhere. Instead of processing the hurt, you go into. This probably has to do with unresolved intimacy issues on their end. There's also a pattern here. Avoidant attachment behaviors, perhaps even narcissistic tendencies. Meanwhile, your heart is curled up in a corner like, hey, can we just say we're sad? But intellectualization doesn't let the heart speak. It turns feelings into case studies. Another example, a parent you were never close to passes away. You don't cry, you don't feel guilt, you don't feel anger. You just say, well, they did the best they could. Intergenerational trauma is complicated, which, yes, all true. But also, you're allowed to feel conflicted, numb, grateful, furious, anything. You don't have to earn your grief by writing a thesis on it. And here's the tricky part. Sometimes intellectualization is mistaken for healing. You sound composed. You can explain your past without flinching. People say, wow, you've done so much work. But you know there's still a wall up. You're not avoiding the story. You're avoiding the emotion. So what do? You don't have to ditch the thinking. Analysis can be helpful. It helps us find patterns, gain perspective, make sense of chaos. But it should be a bridge, not a hiding place. Next time you catch yourself breaking down an emotional experience like a researcher, pause and ask, what am I feeling in my body right now? What emotion am I avoiding by explaining this? What would happen if I just felt it, without trying to fix it? You don't have to write an essay on your pain. Sometimes it's enough to just sit with it. Cry. Breathe. Let the feeling move through you instead of dissecting it. Here's a small exercise. The next time you go through something difficult, instead of journaling about what happened, write. If my body could speak right now, what would it say? Let go of the logic for a minute. Let the emotions speak without the filter. You might be surprised what comes up. Not analysis, not theory, but truth. Because at the end of the day, intellectualization isn't bad. It's just incomplete. It's a defense mechanism, not a healing mechanism. It helps us understand the pain. But healing comes when we feel it. All right, deep breath. We've done thinking. Now let's do something that feels way more fun, but just as emotionally loaded. Humor as a defense. You ever meet someone who can turn their worst breakup into a stand-up routine? Or make a joke in the middle of telling a story that's actually heartbreaking? Like they say, yeah, my childhood was wild. My parents' idea of emotional support was not talking to me. But hey, character development, right? And everyone laughs. Because it's funny. But also, it's not. That's humor as a defense mechanism. It's when we use laughter to shield pain, to make the unbearable feel bearable. And here's the twist: it works. It really works. That's why it's one of the healthiest and trickiest defenses out there. Let's unpack it. There's something powerful about humor. It's alchemy. You take something raw, something heavy, and you flip it. You reframe it. You laugh at it. It gives you control. It gives you space. When you joke about your trauma, it's like saying, "This doesn't own me anymore. I can play with it now." But, and it's a big but, when humor is only a shield and not a bridge, that's when it can become avoidance. Let's go deeper. You're in therapy, or even just talking with a friend, and you bring up something real. Yeah, when I was little, I used to hide in the closet during my parents' fights. Good times. And then you laugh. Maybe they laugh too. Boom, emotional escape hatch pulled. You've just bypassed a raw moment with a perfectly timed punchline. Now, it's not always bad. Sometimes that laugh opens the door to vulnerability. It disarms people, makes the heavy stuff easier to talk about. That's what makes this defense so functional. Unlike repression or denial, which push pain deep underground, humor acknowledges the pain. It just wraps it in comedy. It's like emotional bubble wrap. But what happens when the joke becomes the armor? When you never let yourself, or others, sit in the real feeling. That's when humor stops being a bridge and becomes a wall. You might start thinking, if I make them laugh, they won't worry about me. If I keep it light, no one will ask the hard questions. If I joke about it, I won't cry about it. And that's the thing. Sometimes we use humor so well, we trick ourselves into thinking we're fine. But underneath, there's still grief, anger, shame, fear, and they don't go away just because we put a witty spin on them. Let me give you an example. Someone says, "I'm not good at relationships. I basically love people until they leave. But hey, at least I'm consistent." Everyone chuckles. But if you pause, like really pause, you hear what's actually being said. That's heartbreak, abandonment, a story that hurts. The joke makes it palatable, but the pain is still there, hiding between the punchlines. Now, this doesn't mean we should stop laughing. Sometimes humor is how we survive. In fact, Studies show that people who use humor in stressful situations often cope better long term. It reduces anxiety, builds resilience, and helps people process tough experiences. But the key is knowing when the laugh is a release and when it's a deflection. So how do you tell? Here are some cues. If your jokes about yourself always land a little too hard, if people laugh but then get quiet, if you feel like crying right after making a joke, that's your signal. The humor is pointing to something real, and maybe it's time to stop laughing long enough to feel it. Try this. Next time you make a self-deprecating joke or laugh through something painful, pause and ask, what emotion was hiding behind that laugh? You don't have to stop being funny, but give yourself permission to also be honest. Because the best kind of humor is the kind that comes through the pain, not the kind that avoids it. It says, yeah, this hurt, and I'm still here, and I can laugh because I've felt it. That kind of humor isn't a mask, it's medicine. So yeah, laughing so you don't cry. We've all done it. Sometimes it's survival, but healing. That happens when you laugh and cry, and realize both are sacred. Compartmentalization. You ever have a friend who's going through something major? A breakup, a death in the family, job stress, and they're just chill, like eerily calm. They show up, make jokes, get their tasks done, smile politely. And when you ask how they're holding up, it's, oh, it's been a rough week. Anyway, what's for lunch? You're looking at compartmentalization in the wild. It's like emotional Tetris. The brain says, this feeling doesn't belong here right now. So it packs it up and shoves it into a mental storage unit labeled, deal with later. And here's the kicker, it works. In the short term, it's functional, productive, even heroic. Because life doesn't always give us space to collapse. Got a presentation at work the day after your heart gets broken. You're not going to fall apart in the boardroom. You're going to box up that heartbreak, push it down, and get through the slides. That's compartmentalization doing its job. It lets you function when feelings feel like too much. But like all defense mechanisms, there's a cost. Let's break it down. Compartmentalization is when the mind separates conflicting thoughts, emotions, or experiences into different mental rooms so they don't overlap. Think of it like your brain is an office building. On floor 1, you're a loving partner. On floor 2, you're a stressed out manager. On floor 3, you're the kid still angry at your dad. Floor 4, that's sealed off. Don't ask. No access. Each part of you gets its own room. Each emotion stays in its own box. And as long as those boxes don't spill into each other, you're golden. You feel stable, in control. But eventually, the door creaks open. You yell at your partner over something tiny. You cry after a totally normal meeting. You explode when someone cuts you off in traffic. And you realize all those sealed boxes, they were never really locked, just ignored. Let's use an example. Say you're a nurse in the ER. Every day, you witness trauma, injuries, deaths, families breaking down. If you let yourself feel it all in the moment, you'd be paralyzed. So, you compartmentalize. You shift into clinical mode. Do your job. Stay focused. Block out the emotions. And when your shift ends, you either half open the emotional vault slowly and process. B, keep it locked up. Go home and feel numb. Option A is functional compartmentalization. Option B is when things start to turn into emotional debt. Here's the danger over time. If you never revisit those boxes, they start to leak. Not all at once, but in weird ways. You struggle with intimacy. You feel off, but can't explain why. Your body starts keeping the score. Headaches, anxiety, fatigue. Because those feelings didn't disappear. They're just scattered in emotional attics you forgot to sweep. Another example. Let's say you're someone who grew up in a chaotic household. Now, as an adult, you're the definition of composed. Everything in its place. You never cry at work. You never raise your voice. You've built your life on control, on keeping it together. But underneath that calm, there's grief, anger, fear. Stuff you never let in because, growing up, it wasn't safe to feel it. So you learn to survive by slicing yourself into roles: the achiever, the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who never breaks down. And you keep those roles neatly separate from your actual emotions. That's compartmentalization becoming identity level. It works until it doesn't. Because emotions aren't meant to be boxed forever. They're meant to move, to integrate. If they don't, you start feeling like a ghost in your own life. So, how do you know if you're compartmentalizing too much? Some signs. You can't explain why you suddenly feel numb or empty. You can't access emotions when you want to. Like trying to cry and nothing comes out. You feel like different versions of yourself in different environments. You avoid certain memories, places, or topics like they're landmines. People close to you say you seem fine, but you know you're just good at appearing fine. And again, this doesn't make you broken. It means your brain did what it had to do to protect you. Compartmentalization is the psychological version of, let's put this in a drawer and come back later. But healing comes when you do come back, when you open the drawer. Not all at once, not with a crowbar, but gently, with curiosity, with support if you need it. Try this. Notice when you switch modes emotionally. Ask yourself, what am I not letting into this moment? Write a letter to a part of yourself you tend to hide. Let them speak. When something feels fine, too fast, ask, did I actually process that? Or did I shelve it? Because those boxes in your brain, they're not meant to be locked forever. Sometimes, healing is just about cracking them open, letting a little light in, and realizing what's inside isn't nearly as scary as we thought. Isolation of effect. You remember what happened. You can list the facts. You could give the play-by-play like a reporter on the evening news. Yeah, my parents divorced when I was 9. Dad packed his things in a single afternoon. I remember the shirt he was wearing, the sound of the front door closing, and then you pause. No crack in the voice. No change in expression. Just the story. That's isolation of effect. It's when your mind lets you recall a painful or traumatic event, but strips away the emotion. Like memory, with the feelings muted, detached, blunted. You remember, but you don't feel. Let's break it down. This defense mechanism is one of the mind's more subtle, surgical tools. It's not as loud as denial or as performative as humor. It doesn't hide the event. It just hides the weight of it. It's often rooted in survival. When emotions are too overwhelming, or there's no safe place to express them, the brain makes a deal. You can keep the memory, but I'm holding on to the feelings. It's like your brain turns into an editor and censors the parts that hurt the most. And from the outside, you might even seem resilient, controlled, logical, almost too okay. Here's an example. A man talks about losing his brother in an accident. He describes the call he got, the funeral, cleaning out his brother's room. But when someone asks how he felt during that time, he says, it was a lot. But I guess I just did what needed to be done. And that's it. No tears. No words like, sad, angry, shocked, or numb. Just a clean retelling, like he was reading it from someone else's diary. That's isolation of affect in action. You might even hear phrases like, "It was tough, but I handled it. That was just a part of life. I've moved on from that." It's not about denial. They know it happened. It's not repression. The memory hasn't been buried, but the emotional charge, gone, or at least tucked far, far away. This often shows up in therapy rooms. Someone will describe something harrowing, abuse, grief, loss, in a tone as flat as if they're talking about doing laundry. And it's not because they don't care. It's because they can't access the feeling. That was the trade off their psyche made to keep functioning. This is especially common in high-pressure environments, e.g., medical professionals, soldiers, crisis responders, childhood traumas where showing emotion wasn't safe or welcomed. Over-intellectualizing personalities, people who prefer analysis over emotion. And here's the kicker sometimes. We even isolate affect from ourselves. You might look back on a moment in your life and think, why don't I remember crying? Why did I just keep going like nothing happened? Shouldn't that have hit me harder? The answer: your brain was protecting you, emotionally wrapping you so you could keep moving. But over time, this creates disconnection. Disconnection from yourself, from your own humanity, from the part of you that should have cried, or screamed, or been comforted. And the longer you stay cut off from those feelings, the more life starts to feel muted. Like you're watching your own experiences from behind glass. So how do you start undoing this? Gently, intentionally, safely. Here are a few starting points. Use the body as a gateway. Emotions live in the body, even if your mind doesn't register them. Pay attention to subtle cues: tightness in your chest, a lump in your throat, a clenched jaw. Ask yourself, if this sensation could speak, what would it say? Reconnect through storytelling. Write or talk about the event again. But this time, pause after each sentence. Ask, what did I feel right then? Even if the answer is, I don't know, sit with it. Get curious, not judgmental. Don't force feelings to show up. That can make the walls go up higher. Instead, say, maybe I wasn't ready to feel then, but I might be now. Use creative expression. Art, music, poetry, even movement. These bypass the rational brain and let your feelings show up in disguised forms. Seek safe spaces, whether that's a therapist, a journal, or a trusted friend. Give those emotions somewhere safe to land when they finally arrive. Because here's the truth, the emotions aren't gone. They're just waiting. Waiting for you to say, it's safe now. You can come out. And when they do, it might not be pretty. It might not be clean, but it will be real. And real is the first step toward healing. You don't have to be afraid of the feeling behind the memory. You survived the event. You can survive the feeling too. Suppression. You know that feeling when something unpleasant bubbles up in your brain. A memory, a thought, an emotion. And your immediate instinct is, nope, not right now. You're not denying it. You're not pretending it never happened. You're just choosing not to deal with it. That's suppression. It's like putting your feelings on airplane mode. They're still there. You've just temporarily silenced the notifications. And unlike repression, which is unconscious and automatic, suppression is intentional. It's you saying, yeah, I know this is here. But let's circle back to that. Maybe, never. Let's say you're in the middle of a busy workday and suddenly remember The fight you had with your partner last night. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops. But instead of diving into that emotional swamp, your brain goes, nope, save it for later. You take a deep breath, open your email, and push through. And for a while, it works. You function. You smile. You even forget for a bit. That's suppression doing its job. It's like emotional tab management. You don't close the tab. You just minimize it. Drag it into the background, and sometimes that's incredibly useful. Imagine you're giving a eulogy at a loved one's funeral. You have to get through it without breaking down. So you suppress. You hold back the tears until you're alone later. Or maybe you're in a high-stakes meeting and you're on the verge of a panic attack. Your mind whispers, not here, not now. That's a survival skill. That's control. Suppression gives you the power to pause your emotions until you're ready to feel them on your terms. But here's where it gets tricky. What happens when not now becomes never? What happens when you keep putting off those emotional emails until your inbox is overflowing? You start to feel disconnected, restless. You find yourself crying during a random commercial or snapping at someone over nothing. Because even though you've been pressing pause, the emotions are still running in the background, quietly piling up. Let's use an example. Let's say your best friend betrayed your trust. You're angry, hurt. But instead of sitting with it, you say, "It's fine. I don't want to talk about it. Let's just move on." You suppress the pain. You avoid the conversation. You distract yourself. And from the outside, you look composed. But weeks later, you're suddenly irritable, exhausted, anxious for no clear reason. That's the suppressed emotion leaking out sideways. Because emotions don't disappear just because we ignore them. They don't vanish when we swipe them away like an email notification. They wait, and sometimes they wait so long that we forget what we were even avoiding. We just know we don't feel right anymore. Here's another flavor of suppression grief. Someone passes away. You go into organizer mode, handle logistics, support everyone else, stay busy. You keep your own grief locked in a mental drawer labeled later. And then later never comes. So what do? You keep moving. You keep working. You keep functioning until one day something small, a smell, a song, a date on the calendar, cracks the drawer open, and everything you pushed down floods in like it never left, because it didn't. So, how do we tell the difference between healthy suppression and emotional avoidance? Here's a quick self-check. Are you intentionally revisiting what you suppressed when you feel safe? Or are you permanently locking it away? Are you still feeling emotionally present in your life? Or do things feel numb, flat, disconnected? Are your emotions showing up at strange times? Irritability, sadness, anxiety with no clear trigger. Do people say you're strong when you really feel like you're faking being okay? Suppression becomes unhealthy when it turns into a permanent habit, when it stops being a pause and starts being a full-on escape. But the good news, because suppression is conscious, you also have the conscious power to undo it. You can decide, okay, I've avoided this long enough. Let's feel it now, even just a little. Here are a few ways to safely revisit what you've been avoiding. Set a timer. Tell yourself, I'll think about this for just 5 minutes. Let it rise. No pressure to solve it. Just feel it. When the timer goes off, you can walk away if you want. But often, you'll find you don't need to. Write the unsent letter. To the person who hurt you. To your past self. To the version of you still waiting to be heard. You don't have to send it. Just get it out of your head. Let your body speak. Suppressed emotions don't just live in your thoughts. They live in your body. Movement, breathwork, even stretching can help bring those locked up feelings to the surface gently. Say it out loud, even if it's to no one. Even if it's in the car or the shower. Naming what you feel gives it shape. It makes it real. Because suppression, while powerful, was never meant to be the final step. It's just a detour, a pause button until you're ready to press play. And the moment you are, you don't have to dive into the deep end. Just dip your toes. Open the drawer a crack. Whisper to your brain, okay, I'm ready to think about that now. And what you'll find is this. The feelings you avoided aren't monsters. They're messages, waiting patiently for you to finally hear them. Trivializing, you slam your laptop shut after a brutal email from your boss. Your heart's racing, your hands are trembling. But out loud you say, itch, not a big deal, it's fine, just another Monday. Or maybe someone breaks your heart, bad, like soul-level betrayal. And your response, whatever. I didn't even care that much anyway. That, my friend, is trivializing. The art of brushing off emotional landmines like they're just specks of dust. It's when something actually affects you deeply, but instead of acknowledging it, you minimize it, downplay it, shrink it until it seems like no big deal. The hurt's real, but your reaction says, meh, I'm good. Let's make this clear. Trivializing isn't lying. You're not inventing a story. You're just shrinking the truth to make it easier to carry. It's emotional Photoshop, cropping the image, softening the colors, lowering the contrast so it doesn't look as harsh. And sometimes that's a coping strategy. Because if you admitted how much something actually affected you, you might break. So instead, you smile, you joke, you call it drama or nothing. You tell yourself, I'm overreacting. Other people have it worse. I should be grateful. It sounds responsible, mature, emotionally intelligent, even. But what you're really doing is gaslighting yourself. Just a little. Here's what it looks like in real life. Scenario wetting. You were passed over for a promotion you've been working toward for 2 years. Instead of processing your disappointment, you say, it's okay. I didn't really want the extra responsibility anyway. Scenario 2, a close friend forgets your birthday. Again, you feel invisible, hurt. But out loud, no biggie! I hate birthdays anyway. The scenario 3, your partner crosses a boundary you clearly set. Instead of confronting it, you say, it wasn't that serious. I probably overreacted. Notice the pattern. Trivializing is like building a dam around your feelings, trying to control the flood by convincing yourself there's nothing to be flooded about. But here's the problem, that water. It builds, and what starts as tiny waves of, I'm fine, becomes a quiet undercurrent of resentment, sadness, or burnout you don't know how to name anymore. It's a silent erosion of your emotional landscape, and people around you might not even notice because you seem chill, easygoing, unbothered. But inside, you're slowly disappearing from your own truth. Now, let's be real. This isn't always done consciously. Many of us were trained to trivialize. If you grew up in an environment where feelings were dramatic, or being upset got you shamed, ignored, or punished, you learned to smile through pain fast. If expressing vulnerability made you feel weak, needy, or too much, then trivializing became your emotional invisibility cloak, a safe disguise, but also a trap. Because here's what happens when you do this too often. You stop trusting your own emotional signals. You begin second, guessing what you deserve. You start accepting less in relationships, in work, in life. And eventually, you wake up disconnected, like you're living a watered down version of your own life. So what's the fix? Ironically, it starts with not fixing it. It starts with acknowledging that something small might not actually be small. Here's a little exercise. Think of something you brushed off recently, something that stung but you didn't let yourself feel. Now ask, if someone else told me this happened to them, would I minimize it too? What would I want to feel about it? If I gave myself permission, then try saying, actually, that did hurt, even just to yourself, even if it feels dramatic or silly or exaggerated. Because feelings don't need to be big to be valid, and you don't need a breakdown to justify a response. Sometimes just saying, that mattered, is enough to reclaim a little piece of yourself. You can also try this trick in conversation. Instead of instantly saying, it's fine, try replacing it with, I'm still figuring out how I feel about that. Or I'm not sure I'm okay with that yet. Or simply, that affected me more than I expected. These are soft entries back into emotional honesty. No need to spill your guts or fall apart. Just crack the door open. And yes, sometimes trivializing is what gets you through the day. Sometimes you do have to keep moving. But don't forget to circle back. Don't let "it's fine" become your emotional resting place. Because the version of you that's calm, kind, and cool with everything isn't always your strongest self. Sometimes your strongest self is the one who says, actually, that mattered, and I'm going to let it matter. That's where healing starts. Not in shouting, not in dramatics, but in telling the truth, even softly, even just to yourself. Splitting. You ever meet someone and instantly think, wow, they're incredible. Like, actually perfect. They say all the right things, make you laugh, understand you like no one else, and for a moment, it feels like you finally found someone who just gets it. And then, one thing happens. They forget something important, or they criticize you in a way that stings. And suddenly, it's like a switch flipped. They've changed. They're selfish. Maybe I never really knew them. That's splitting. It's this defense mechanism where the brain tries to simplify the emotional chaos by putting people and situations into clean, extreme categories, all good or all bad, love or hate, right or wrong, safe or unsafe. No in between, no nuance. Just emotional shortcuts designed to protect you from overwhelm. At first it feels clarifying, empowering even. Because gray areas, they're messy. They ask us to hold multiple truths at once. And that's exhausting when you're emotionally overloaded. So the mind goes, cool, let's not do that. Let's just pick a side. It's not always conscious. Most of us don't walk around saying, I will now demonize this person. But emotionally, that's exactly what happens. One bad moment overrides months, or even years, of good ones. One mistake cancels out every kind gesture. This isn't just about other people either. It happens inside us too. You mess up once at work, and your inner voice jumps straight to, I'm useless. I'm a failure. Why do I even try? Or you forget to reply to a friend and suddenly think, I'm the worst. I ruin everything. It's extreme, but it feels true in the moment. Because splitting takes a snapshot of your worst fear and frames it like the whole movie. It's especially common if you've grown up in environments where emotional safety wasn't consistent, like when love and comfort were unpredictable. One day warm, the next cold. So to survive that, your brain learned If I know someone's all good or all bad, I can protect myself better. It's not drama, it's survival logic. But here's the trap: the more you split, the harder it gets to stay grounded in the truth. Because people are complex. Life is messy. And when you don't allow space for imperfection, everything starts to feel threatening. So, what do you do when you catch yourself in that spiral? First, just noticing it is a win. If you feel yourself swinging from, "they're amazing," to, "they're terrible," in a heartbeat, pause, take a step back. Ask yourself, am I reacting to one moment or the full picture? That alone starts to open up space in your brain. Not for justification, not to excuse bad behavior, but to make room for both truths to exist at the same time. Like, maybe your partner forgot something important and that hurt you, but they also showed up for you in 100 other ways. Both can be real. Or maybe your friend disappointed you, and that stung. But that doesn't automatically mean they never cared. People mess up. Doesn't mean they're evil. This kind of thinking doesn't come naturally. It takes practice. One thing that helps: try using "and" instead of "but." Like, I'm really upset with them, and I still care about them. It keeps you out of that emotional corner where you feel like you have to choose one narrative and stick to it. Journaling helps too. Write down what you love about someone, then write what's frustrating. Seeing both sides on paper grounds you in the reality that people are layered. No one is just one thing, and neither are you. If this resonates deeply, it might be because you've been in survival mode for a long time. Maybe you've had to create categories just to feel safe. That's valid. This mechanism developed to protect you. But over time, it can become a prison, because splitting keeps you bouncing between extremes. And that means constantly questioning your judgment, your relationships, your place in the world. True healing comes when you can sit in the middle. When you can say, "This person hurt me, and they're not all bad." Or, "I made a mistake, and I'm still a good person." That's emotional maturity, not perfection, not forgiveness for everything, just making space for the full truth. Because black and white thinking might feel clean and safe, but life is full of grays. And the gray isn't where clarity goes to die, it's where real connection begins. Altruism. You ever notice how doing something kind for someone else somehow makes you feel better? Not in a smug way, not performative, but that quiet kind of peace you feel when you've helped a friend, supported a stranger, or shown up for someone who really needed it. That's not just being nice. That's altruism as a defense mechanism, and it runs deeper than people realize. Psychologically speaking, altruism is when we channel our own difficult emotions, like guilt, anger, anxiety, or grief, into helping others. It's like emotional transmutation. You're hurting, so you give. You feel helpless, so you help. You feel broken, so you show up whole for someone else. And yeah, it sounds noble, and in a lot of ways it is. But here's what makes it a defense mechanism. You're not just helping others for them. You're doing it to cope, to soothe something in yourself that feels unresolved. And you might not even realize it. Let's make it real. Someone grows up in a chaotic household, emotionally neglected, maybe even abandoned. As an adult, they become the friend who's always there, the caregiver, the emotional first responder. They'll drop everything for you. They'll fix your problems before you finish explaining them. But when it comes to their own needs, silence, deflection, because helping others distracts them from facing their own stuff. And that's the double edge of altruism. It's healing, and it can be a shield. A person might volunteer constantly after losing a loved one, not just to give back, but to stay busy, to not sit with the grief. Or a parent might pour themselves into their child's life because they feel like they failed in another area of their own. Or someone who's dealing with chronic anxiety becomes the rock for everyone else, so they don't have to admit how unstable they feel inside. Altruism helps us feel in control when we're emotionally out of control. And unlike more destructive defense mechanisms, like acting out or displacement, this one gets socially rewarded. You get called kind, empathetic, selfless. But no one asks, hey, are you okay under all of that giving? That's why altruism is so complex. It's both beautiful and, sometimes, a bit of a mask, but make no mistake, it works. Studies show that acts of kindness and service release dopamine and oxytocin, the feel-good neurochemicals. Altruism literally soothes the nervous system, and that's why it can be so addictive. You help others, you feel better. Rinse, repeat. But when it becomes your only strategy for dealing with pain, that's where it gets tricky. Because sometimes being the helper is easier than being the one who needs help. Sometimes showing up for everyone else is a way to avoid asking, who's showing up for me? Ever met someone who goes out of their way for everyone, yet you never see them talk about their own struggles? That might be altruism doing double duty, protecting them from vulnerability while giving them a sense of purpose. It's not manipulation, it's survival. The question isn't, is altruism bad? The question is, what's fueling it? Are you giving because it brings genuine connection? Or are you giving because it's the only way you know how to quiet the pain? If the second one hits a little too close, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're fake or broken or unhealthy. It just means that a part of you found a brilliant, caring way to self-soothe. And that deserves compassion, but also a gentle challenge. To ask yourself, what would it feel like to let someone take care of me for once? Or, if I stopped over giving, what feelings would come up? That's where the growth lies. Here's something worth remembering. Helping others can absolutely be healing, but it shouldn't come at the expense of your own needs. Because when you constantly give from an empty cup, it stops being altruism and starts being avoidance. So, try this next time. Before you say yes to helping someone else, take a breath and ask, am I also helping myself right now? Or am I avoiding something? And if the answer is, I'm just trying to not feel this thing I don't want to feel, that's a cue, not to stop giving, but to start including yourself in your kindness. Because you deserve that same gentleness, that same grace, not just from others, but from yourself. So yeah, altruism is a beautiful coping mechanism. It transforms pain into purpose. But don't forget, healing doesn't only happen in what you do for others. Sometimes, the most generous thing you can do is give yourself the care you so freely offer everyone else. Fixation. Have you ever reacted way too strongly to something small, and then wondered, why did that hit so hard? Like, someone doesn't text back, and suddenly you feel abandoned, or you get some mild feedback, and it feels like a personal attack. That's not just sensitivity. That might be fixation. Fixation is when a piece of your emotional history gets stuck in time. A moment, a feeling, a version of yourself, lodged like a splinter in your psyche. You move on physically, but mentally, emotionally, you're still living in that story. And the wild thing is, you usually don't know you're doing it. It's like having an invisible script running in the background of your brain. And when something in the present hits that same emotional note, your system responds as if you're back in that past moment. Defensively, protectively, automatically. Fixation often stems from unresolved emotional stages, especially during childhood or major formative periods. For example, if love felt inconsistent growing up, you might still be fixated on earning affection as an adult, always proving, always pleasing, even when it's not necessary anymore. Or maybe you were humiliated as a teen, bullied, rejected, silenced, and now you struggle with speaking up even when it's safe. Your brain's still playing by old rules. It's saying, this is dangerous, even when it's not. It's not weakness. It's patterning, neural grooves formed from repetition and survival. And your mind, being the loyal little machine that it is, keeps pulling from the same old playbook. Here's where it gets deeper. Fixation doesn't just keep you stuck emotionally. It influences who you become. You might build your whole identity around it. That guy who always jokes about being the screw up. He might be fixated on the one time he failed and was never allowed to forget it. The woman who prides herself on never needing anyone. Maybe she's fixated on a time when needing someone meant getting hurt. Even overachievers can be stuck in fixation, reliving a moment where they felt invisible unless they were performing. In each case, you're not just reacting to the present, you're defending against the past. And the longer that story runs unchallenged, the more it starts to shape your relationships, your choices, even your self-worth. You begin to confuse emotional familiarity with truth. You start to believe, people always leave. I'm never enough. If I let go, everything will fall apart. But where did those ideas really come from? Fixation thrives in the unconscious. It feels like truth, but it's usually just unexamined pain. Now here's the thing. It's hard to identify fixation because it often shows up like personality. Like, oh, I'm just the type who doesn't trust easily. Or, I just need control. But when you trace it back, it's not who you are. It's what happened to you. The good news. Fixation can be untangled. But it doesn't start with force. It starts with curiosity. You can begin by asking yourself a few powerful questions. Where did I learn this pattern? What am I afraid would happen if I did things differently? Am I reacting to this moment? Or to something that happened years ago? Sometimes, it helps to write out your emotional timeline. Map the moments that shaped how you see love, conflict, worth, and trust. What you'll usually find is that your biggest emotional reflexes tie back to one or two unresolved emotional loops. Another clue: when your response feels disproportionate to the situation, like your friend reschedules plans and you spiral into thoughts of rejection, or your partner forgets something and you feel unlovable. That's not about the moment. That's about the story. And hey, it's okay. We all carry old stories. The goal isn't to shame yourself for having them. It's to recognize them so they don't run the show. Because the truth is, you're not who you were when that fixation first formed. You've grown. You've learned. You've survived things you once thought would break you. You're allowed to update the narrative. You can be someone who trusts, even if you once had to guard yourself. You can be loved, even if you once felt invisible. You can let go, even if holding on once kept you safe. Fixation isn't failure. It's just emotional residue from a version of you who did the best they could. But now, you don't have to keep telling that same story. You get to write a new one. one that doesn't begin and end with pain, because healing doesn't always look like dramatic change. Sometimes it's just quietly realizing, I don't need this story anymore. And that is where freedom begins. Undoing. You ever catch yourself doing something nice right after having a not so nice thought, like you're trying to balance the scales? You think something petty, something dark, something that freaks you out a little, so you do the opposite in real life. You compliment the person you just mentally trashed. You act extra kind to someone you were just annoyed with. You pray a little harder after a bad thought flashes through your mind. That's not just guilt, that's undoing. Undoing is a defense mechanism where we try to erase, cancel out, or reverse an uncomfortable thought, feeling, or behavior by doing something else, something we think makes it okay. It's like your brain says, oops, that was too dark. Let's fix it real quick. Now here's the wild part, it's usually unconscious. You don't plan it. It just kicks in, especially if what you're thinking or feeling threatens the image you have of yourself. Like, I'm a good person, I'm in control, I'm not jealous, or I would never do that. But a split, second thought or urge breaks that illusion. So your brain scrambles to clean it up. Imagine this: a parent has a fleeting thought of frustration with their child. Maybe they imagine yelling, or worse, something they'd never act on. They're horrified by the thought. So, what happens next? They overcompensate. Extra affection, maybe a surprise gift, super attentive, not out of genuine joy, but to undo the thought, to prove to themselves and maybe the world, I'm not that person. I couldn't even think that. It's kind of like a mental Trivializing, and it's not always a one-time thing. Undoing can show up in habits, rituals, or even relationships. Take someone in a relationship who cheats, but then becomes suddenly more generous, more romantic, more perfect than ever before. Not out of love, but out of a subconscious need to cancel out the guilt. Or someone who lashes out in anger, then showers you with kindness, not necessarily as manipulation, but because they hate what that moment of anger revealed. Undoing is often tangled up with morality. Right vs wrong, clean vs dirty. It can show up in people who are raised in rigid environments, where intrusive thoughts weren't just thoughts, but evidence of being bad. So they learn early on, if you think something wrong, you must do something right to undo it. And while it might sound a little superstitious, it's incredibly common. Psychologists see it often in OCD and anxiety disorders, where someone has a distressing thought and then performs a ritual like washing, counting, praying, or checking to neutralize the mental threat. But it doesn't have to be that extreme. Even subtle undoing, like people pleasing after an argument or over-apologizing for something tiny, can be signs your brain is trying to smooth over something uncomfortable. So why does this even happen? Because thoughts can be really scary, especially the ones that challenge how we see ourselves. But here's the thing your brain forgets: a thought is not an action. A passing urge isn't a crime. A flicker of jealousy doesn't make you toxic. A moment of anger doesn't mean you're dangerous. It just means you're human, with a layered, emotional brain that sometimes serves up weird, unwanted mental content. The danger with undoing isn't the act, it's what it avoids. When we rely too heavily on undoing, we don't process the real emotion. We don't explore the root of the thought. We just scramble to cover it up with something that feels better or looks better. But healing doesn't come from erasing. It comes from facing. So, the next time a thought pops up that freaks you out, pause, don't rush to cancel it, ask, where did that come from? What am I afraid this thought means about me? Eyes there, something underneath this I need to feel instead of fix. And if you do something kind or thoughtful afterward, that's okay. That's human. But let it come from a place of presence, not panic, of compassion, not cover up. Undoing tries to protect you from shame. That's its job. But you don't need to be afraid of your thoughts. You're allowed to be messy inside, complex, contradictory. The goal isn't to never have a dark moment. It's to not let that moment define how you relate to yourself. So yeah, sometimes we all hit undo. Just don't forget the real growth comes when you stop erasing and start understanding. Introjection. Have you ever caught yourself thinking something and then realized, wait, that's not even your thought? Like you're about to make a decision and some voice in your head says, you shouldn't do that. You'll embarrass yourself. Or, that's selfish. Be grateful for what you have. And suddenly you're not sure if that's actually you or just something you absorbed along the way. That right there is introjection. Introjection is what happens when we unconsciously adopt the beliefs, rules, and voices of the people who had power or influence over us, especially early in life. Parents, teachers, religious figures, older siblings, authority figures. Anyone whose approval or disapproval shaped how safe we felt. It's like psychological osmosis. We don't just hear what they say, we internalize it. And before long, we stop realizing it ever came from them. We start thinking it's just the truth. Imagine a child growing up with a parent who constantly says things like, "You're too sensitive. Big boys don't cry. Don't speak unless you have something important to say." That child learns to push down emotions, second, guess their voice, and fear vulnerability. And even years later, decades later, that inner monologue still runs in the background. Even if the parent is gone, even if the adult version of them knows better, that's introjection, a kind of psychological inheritance. You don't remember signing up for it, but here you are, living by its rules. And it's not just negative stuff. Sometimes introjection brings in values that help us, like a deep belief in hard work or kindness. But even positive beliefs can become harmful if they're rigid, unexamined, or used to avoid discomfort. Let's say your family placed huge value on being strong, never showing weakness, always pushing through. That sounds admirable, right? But if you introjected that belief without choice, it might lead to burnout. You might ignore your limits, struggle to ask for help, and deep down feel like resting to failing, because the voice in your head says, "Tough it out. Don't be lazy." But again, whose voice is that? Here's the key thing about introjection. It disguises itself as you. It doesn't come labeled as your dad's voice or your seventh grade teacher's judgment. It comes as thoughts like, I shouldn't bother anyone with my problems. I'll never be good enough. I need to be the smart $1, the strong $1, the fixer. And often, it stays unnoticed until we slow down and question it. Try this the next time you notice harsh self-talk or a limiting belief. Pause and ask, would I choose to believe this if I weren't afraid? Does this voice sound like someone I know? Is this truth or just training? Because you might find that the inner critic, the doubter, the voice that shuts you down, was installed years ago when you had no choice but to accept it. But now, you do have a choice. You can challenge that voice. You can replace it with something more supportive. You can learn to speak to yourself the way you needed someone else to speak to you. This isn't about blaming people from your past. Most of them were just passing down what was passed down to them. But it is about awareness. Because what you don't name, you can't change. And changing it doesn't mean deleting everything. It means filtering, choosing, asking, is this belief mine or borrowed? You might be surprised how many parts of you were never really you. They were just survival strategies wearing your voice, and that's okay. That was then. Now, it's your mind, your body, your voice. So the next time your brain offers up some automatic judgment or fear, step back and wonder, who told me this, and do I still believe them? That question. It's the first crack in the armor. And through that crack, real self comes through. Conversion. You ever have a moment where your body completely freaked out, but nothing was technically wrong? Like, your chest gets tight, your vision blurs, your legs feel shaky, but the doctor says your vitals are fine. You're not sick, you're not injured. But something's clearly happening. That's where conversion steps in. It's one of the wildest defense mechanisms because it doesn't just hide your feelings, it translates them into physical symptoms. And I don't mean faking. This isn't about pretending to be sick to skip work. This is real. The pain, the paralysis, the stutter, the fainting, it's not made up. It's just not coming from where you think it is. Conversion disorder, or functional neurological symptom disorder, if we're getting clinical, is when emotional conflict turns into physical expression. The body becomes the outlet for what the mind can't deal with. It's like your emotions are screaming, but your brain's like, nope, can't process that. Let's just reroute it to the nervous system. And suddenly, you can't move your hand, or you lose your voice, or you go blind for an hour with no medical cause. Sounds extreme, right? But it's more common than you think. Maybe not in its most dramatic form, but in quieter, everyday ways. Ever had a tension headache right after an argument you didn't fully express? Or felt nauseous walking into a place where something traumatic happened? Ever lose your voice before a big presentation you were secretly terrified of? That's conversion on a spectrum. It's your body taking on a burden your mind's not ready to carry. Here's a classic example. A soldier in combat sees something horrific, something too overwhelming to process. Not long after, he develops paralysis in his legs. Medically, he's fine, no injury, but neurologically, the legs have just stopped working. Why? Because fleeing the situation isn't allowed. But the emotional urge to escape is so strong, the body makes it happen in a symbolic way. It sounds bizarre until you realize the body is deeply symbolic, and it's been that way for a long time. Freud and his crew studied this over a century ago, especially in women labeled with hysteria, which we now understand as deeply unprocessed trauma and emotional suppression showing up as seizures, paralysis, even blindness. And the thing is, this isn't a historical relic. It happens now. It's just less talked about. Maybe because we still separate the body and mind too much, like they live on different planets. But conversion is a reminder. They don't. Let's make it personal. Think about a time when you couldn't express how you felt. Not just didn't, but genuinely couldn't. Maybe you were raised in a home where anger wasn't safe to show, or sadness was seen as weakness. Or maybe a traumatic experience was never processed, just buried. That emotional energy doesn't just vanish. It has to go somewhere. And if you don't talk it, cry it, scream it, write it, paint it, sometimes your body acts it out instead. It's not manipulative, it's not attention-seeking. It's your nervous system waving a giant red flag, like, hey, there's something under here. We need to look at this. And what makes conversion powerful and terrifying is that it doesn't ask permission. You don't get to say, let me just store this trauma here behind my ribcage politely. It shows up when you're not expecting it. But here's the thing, if your body is speaking for your pain, it means your body is listening to it too. It means it knows something's off. So what do? You start listening back. You don't shame the symptoms. You don't go to war with your body. You get curious. What's this trying to say? What am I not feeling that needs to be felt? Where am I silencing myself emotionally? And how is my body trying to speak up? Sometimes that means therapy. Sometimes it means journaling, somatic work, breath work, crying, screaming into a pillow. Whatever it takes to move the energy that's been stuck. And no, this isn't about saying every illness is caused by emotion. Let's be clear, some stuff is purely biological. But when doctors say, we can't find anything physically wrong, and yet the symptoms persist, conversion should be part of the conversation. Because your body, it's not separate from your story, it's a chapter you carry. And if the emotions inside that story aren't given space, sometimes the body takes the mic and says everything you were too scared, too hurt, or too numb to say out loud, so the next time your body reacts in a way you don't understand. Before you panic, before you brush it off, ask, what am I not letting myself feel that my body already is? Because maybe, just maybe, that's not dysfunction. It's translation. Devaluation. You know that feeling when someone walks into the room and just starts tearing other people down. Not outright cruelty, more like little jabs, sly comments, subtle digs. You get this weird sense that they're not really mad at the world. They're just trying to feel big by making everyone else feel small. That's devaluation. It's not just rudeness. It's not casual hate. It's a defense mechanism, a psychological survival tool. See, deep down, devaluation usually comes from one place: insecurity. But instead of sitting with the pain of not feeling enough, the mind flips it, projects it, pushes it onto someone else. Like, if I can make you seem worthless, I don't have to face how worthless I feel. It's brutal, but it's real. Let's say someone grew up in a home where they were constantly criticized. Nothing was ever good enough. Praise, rare, but judgment, daily. So they internalize the message, I'm not lovable unless I'm perfect. A fast forward to adulthood. They carry that wound with them. But now they have a choice: either confront the pain or protect themselves from it. And devaluation is one of the fastest ways to protect. It's like, I don't want to feel small, so I'm going to shrink you first. Maybe it looks like mocking someone else's success. Oh, she only got promoted because she kisses up. Maybe it's tearing down someone's vulnerability. Ooh, he's so dramatic, always with the feelings. Maybe it's constantly pointing out flaws in others, never with curiosity, always with superiority. And here's the twisted irony. The more threatened someone feels, the more likely they are to devalue the people around them. It's not about truth, it's about power. Because when you don't feel safe internally, you start looking for ways to feel in control externally. Sometimes this shows up in relationships. You might have seen it: one partner constantly puts the other down. Little remarks, backhanded compliments, comparisons. It's not always obvious, but over time it chips away at the other person's self-worth. And the one doing it, deep inside, they're often terrified of being abandoned or of being exposed as not good enough. So they go on offense, shrink the other person, and suddenly the balance feels safer. In friendships, it might look like minimizing someone's accomplishments. Oh, you wrote a book. Cute. Self-published though, right? It's not about the book. It's about keeping the scoreboard tilted. And let's be honest, we've all done it. We've all had moments where we've thought, well, at least I'm not that person, even just in our heads. It's a hit of superiority to soothe something raw beneath the surface. And social media. Woo, devaluation thrives there. Scrolling through highlight reels, the envy builds, and before you know it, you're judging people you don't even know. Of course, she's traveling again. Must be nice to not have real responsibilities. But is that about her? Or is it about you feeling stuck? This isn't about shame, it's about awareness. Because devaluation doesn't make you evil. It makes you human trying to protect yourself in a not so helpful way. And if you flip the script, you'll realize people who constantly devalue others are often the ones who've been devalued the most. When you grow up being told you're not smart enough, good enough, strong enough, eventually, that voice starts to sound like yours. But instead of aiming it inward all the time, you start spraying it outward. Because holding all that pain is exhausting. So the psyche finds relief wherever it can. But here's the cost: every time you shrink someone else, you shrink your capacity for connection. You push people away. You build walls instead of bridges. And worst of all, you reinforce the idea that value is conditional. That it's based on comparison, not inherent worth. So what do you do when you notice that voice in your head? The one that wants to pick someone apart. Pause. Get curious. Ask, what part of me feels small right now? What am I trying to avoid feeling? What would happen if I just let this person shine without making it about me? Because real security doesn't need comparison. It doesn't need to dominate. It doesn't need to devalue. And when you stop trying to feel big by making others small, that's when you actually start to grow. That's when your worth starts coming from within, not from winning some invisible war. So next time you feel that urge to judge, diminish, roll your eyes, take a beat, and remember their light doesn't dim yours and your worth. It never needed to be proven by shrinking anyone else. Symbolization. Ever had a dream that made no sense at all, but still left you with this weird, heavy feeling the next day? Like you dreamt your teeth were falling out, or that you were naked in public, or trying to run but your legs wouldn't move, and you wake up thinking, what was that about? But deep down, you kind of know it meant something. That's symbolization at work. Your brain speaking in metaphor, because sometimes it's safer, or just more tolerable, to feel something symbolically than directly. Symbolization is one of the more poetic defense mechanisms. It doesn't suppress emotion or distort reality. Instead, it channels complex, often unprocessed feelings into images, objects, or actions that represent them. It's like the mind's own secret language. Dreams are the most obvious example. You're not literally afraid of your teeth falling out, but maybe you are anxious about losing control, or feeling powerless, or aging. Your brain just wraps that emotion in an image you can process without going into panic mode. Same with recurring dreams. They're not random. They're often emotional loops your subconscious is trying to resolve over and over again through symbol and story. But symbolization doesn't only show up when you sleep. It shows up in your habits, your rituals, even your art. Let's say someone lights a candle every night before bed, not just for light, but because it makes them feel safe. Maybe it started after a trauma they haven't fully dealt with. Maybe they don't even remember the trauma. But that small ritual, it becomes a symbol, a subconscious way to contain or soothe something too overwhelming to confront head on. Or think about someone who always wears their grandmother's necklace during stressful times, not because it matches their outfit, but because it anchors them. It becomes more than jewelry. It represents comfort, memory, protection. That's symbolization. In grief, it shows up in the smallest things. People keep a voicemail they never delete, or they keep the jacket of someone they lost and never wash it, even years later. They say, "I just can't throw it away," not because they need the object, but because the object holds meaning. It's doing emotional work. In therapy, this happens all the time. People will draw images, build metaphors, write poems that aren't about their pain, but are. A monster under the bed, a locked room with no key, a bird trapped in a cage. They're not just stories. They're symbols of internal states. Kids do this instinctively. They'll say, "My tummy hurts," when they're sad, or "My toy is scared," when they are. They don't have the language for the full emotion, so they use symbols to stand in. And honestly, adults do the same thing. We just get more subtle about it. You ever see someone who's overly obsessed with cleaning? Like, can't relax until the counters are spotless, every sock folded just right. It might look like OCD on the surface, but sometimes it's symbolization. They can't clean the chaos inside, so they clean their environment instead. Control out there, because there's none in here. Religion, too, whether it comforts you or not, is full of symbolization. Rituals, objects, icons, a cross, a prayer rug, a mantra. They aren't just things, they're emotional anchors. They carry memory, identity, comfort, hope. Even when we can't articulate what we're feeling, touching something sacred or just familiar can make us feel seen, grounded. And the thing is, symbolization isn't bad. It's not unhealthy or dysfunctional. It's actually one of the more adaptive defense mechanisms. Instead of denying the emotion or displacing it onto someone else, you translate it. You encode it. That might mean writing a song you can't explain, or designing a tattoo that doesn't make logical sense, but feels right. It might mean having a dream that shakes you, but somehow makes you feel understood, because the mind knows sometimes direct expression is too raw, too dangerous, too overwhelming. So it wraps the emotion in a symbol, something manageable, something you can hold, look at, interact with. But symbolization only works if you're willing to decode it. Ask yourself, what is this dream really about? Why do I keep doing this ritual? What feeling is it protecting? What does this object mean to me, really? Is this art I keep making trying to tell me something? Because once you start listening, the symbols stop being random. They become maps. And maybe they won't take you straight to the emotion, but they'll get you close. Close enough to feel the edges. Close enough to start naming what's been unspoken. So next time something in your life feels oddly important, a dream that won't leave you, a habit you can't explain, a memory you're obsessed with, pause. There might be more to it than what's on the surface. Maybe it's not just a dream, or just a candle, or just a necklace. Maybe it's your inner world, speaking in code, and all it's asking is for you to understand the message. Minimization. You ever stub your toe, almost cry, then immediately go, "It's fine. I'm fine. Not a big deal." Meanwhile, you're limping for the next 10 minutes, pretending you're good. That's the small-scale version of minimization. But in real life, it runs way deeper. It's not just about physical pain. It's about emotional hurt that we quietly tell ourselves doesn't count. Minimization is the mind's way of saying, "Yeah, that hurt, but not enough to feel this bad about it." It's emotional downplaying, a defense mechanism dressed as perspective. And here's the thing. On the surface, it can actually look mature. People praise it all the time. "You're so strong. You don't let anything get to you." But sometimes, that's not strength. It's protection. Because the second you do admit how much something affected you, you have to sit with that pain. And for a lot of people, that's way harder than pretending it didn't exist. Take this for example. Someone goes through a breakup, and instead of saying, "This crushed me," they say, "It wasn't even that serious. We only dated for a few months." But then, they can't sleep. They replay conversations in their head. They stalk their ex's Instagram and wonder why it still hurts. Because it did matter. It was serious to them, but minimization let them skip over all that by labeling it small. Or maybe someone grew up in a home that wasn't, technically, abusive. No one hit them. There was food on the table. But the emotional neglect ran deep. They were invisible, unheard. And now, as adults, they say things like, "It could have been worse. At least I had a roof over my head." That's minimization. It's that whisper in your mind that says, "Other people had it worse, so your pain doesn't count." But pain isn't a competition, and invalidating your own experience doesn't actually make it go away. You might also hear it when people talk about trauma. Like someone gets laid off and says, "Well, at least I'm not starving. I shouldn't complain." Sure, perspective can help, but not when it becomes a shield that stops you from feeling. Because minimizing pain doesn't resolve it. It just sends it underground, and down there, it festers. Sometimes minimization even hides behind humor. You laugh off the bad date, the toxic boss, the microaggressions, like they didn't touch you. "It was whatever. I'm over it." But your body remembers. You get tense. You avoid people. You replay the moment again and again when you're supposed to be asleep. And you know what? Society loves minimization. We've turned it into a badge of honor. Suck it up. Don't be so sensitive. Other people have it worse. We learn to brush things off like that's emotional maturity. But really, sometimes it's just well-trained avoidance. And listen, not everything needs to become a full-blown therapy session. Not every inconvenience is a trauma. But the problem with minimization is that it teaches you to second-guess your own reality. You start wondering, am I being dramatic? Maybe I'm just weak. And once you start doubting your pain, you stop trusting yourself. You stop speaking up. You stop asking for help. So how do you know when you're minimizing? You'll hear it in the little phrases. "It wasn't that bad." "I'm probably overreacting." At least. Any sentence that starts with "least" is often a red flag. At least they didn't hit me. At least I still have a job. Those things might be true, but truth isn't a reason to skip your feelings. You're allowed to say, "This wasn't the worst thing to ever happen to me, but it still hurt." Two things can be true. Perspective doesn't have to cancel pain. It can hold it. And here's the twist. Minimization doesn't just block your own emotions. It can mess with your relationships, too. You might be the person who always tells others, "You'll be fine," when they're opening up to you, not because you don't care, but because you were never allowed to fall apart, so you don't know how to hold space when someone else does. And if you grew up minimizing your own feelings, it'll feel almost unbearable when someone else is emotionally open. You'll want to fix it, shut it down, or shrink it. But real connection comes when you let the moment be big, not bigger than it is, but exactly as big as it feels. So what do you do when you catch yourself minimizing? Try this. Instead of saying, "It's not that bad," ask, "What would I say if this happened to a friend?" Because we're way more compassionate with other people than we are with ourselves. Let yourself feel it without scaling it, without ranking it, without comparing it. Just name the thing that did hurt. That was disappointing. That felt like rejection. Not forever. Not as a pity party. But just long enough to let the emotion breathe, because pain needs oxygen. And when you stop minimizing, you start healing. Affiliation. You ever notice how in your lowest moments, you don't just crave solutions, you crave someone. Not advice, not answers, just presence. Someone who says, "Yeah, I see you. That sucked." And suddenly, it's like your nervous system exhales, even if nothing's fixed. That's the power of affiliation. It's not just connection. It's survival. Affiliation is the defense mechanism where we turn toward others, emotionally, physically, socially, when we're stressed, scared, hurt, or overwhelmed. Instead of shutting down or lashing out, we reach out. We find our people, we attach. And yeah, that might sound soft, but it's actually wired into our biology. Think about it as babies. Our literal survival depends on staying close to someone who protects us. So our brains never stopped building that link between safety and connection. Even as adults, our emotional regulation still happens with others, not just inside ourselves. Ever had a moment where you just had to call someone, even if you didn't know what to say? Or you didn't feel better until you texted your best friend, even if they didn't respond right away? That's not weakness. That's your system reaching for a stabilizer, because being seen regulates your nervous system. Sometimes affiliation looks like seeking support, crying on a friend's couch, showing up at your parents' house, even though you said you were fine, or hanging out in a Discord server because just scrolling the chat makes you feel less alone. And sometimes it's way more subtle. You go through a breakup and suddenly find yourself clinging more tightly to your friend group. You check in more. You laugh harder. You get really into planning little get-togethers. That's your brain balancing the emotional equation. I lost this attachment, but I still belong here. Or maybe something scary happens, an illness, an accident, a job loss, and you instinctively want to be around someone, even if they can't change a thing. That's affiliation doing its job, not to fix, but to contain. But here's the twist: affiliation as a defense isn't always conscious. You might not even realize you're doing it. Someone might say, "I don't like talking about feelings," but they always surround themselves with people. They stay busy, they host every gathering, they check in with everyone. They don't vent, but they need to be around others. That is their coping mechanism. And hey, that's not bad. Affiliation is actually one of the healthiest defense mechanisms out there. It doesn't numb you. It doesn't distort reality. It just brings in backup. But like any defense, it can tilt out of balance. Sometimes, people become overly dependent. They fuse their sense of self with a group, or a partner. They don't feel stable unless they're constantly with someone, texting someone, getting validation from someone. And when that support isn't there, they crash. Because the hard truth is affiliation is healthy when it supplements your emotional world, not when it replaces it. You shouldn't need to fall apart every time someone's unavailable. And if you find yourself attaching to anyone just to avoid feeling alone, even people who hurt you, use you, drain you, that's not affiliation. That's desperation dressed up as connection. So, how do you tell if your affiliation is healthy? Ask yourself, am I reaching out because I trust this person to hold space for me? Or am I reaching out just to not feel what I'm feeling? The one is about support. The other is about escape. But again, this defense mechanism is fundamentally a strength. It reminds us we're not built for isolation. That leaning on others isn't weak. It's how we're wired to recover. And let's talk about something really powerful here, co-regulation. That's the scientific term for what happens when your nervous system literally calms down in the presence of someone else who's grounded. Your heart rate slows. Your breathing steadies. Your cortisol drops. That's not magic. That's biology. That's affiliation. It's why therapists, support groups, recovery programs, even faith communities work. Not because they give you magic answers, but because they offer you a container, a connection point, a reminder that whatever storm is happening inside you, you don't have to weather it alone. So next time you feel like isolating, like pulling away or pretending you're good, check in. Ask yourself, is this one of those times where I need to be held, not fixed? Because even if you don't have the perfect words, even if you just sit beside someone in silence, that is healing. And if you're the one someone reaches for, be that raft. You don't need the right advice. You just need to float, to hold space, because affiliation isn't about being strong. It's about knowing when you don't have to be. It's knowing you can borrow a little calm from someone else. And maybe tomorrow they'll borrow it from you. Acting out. Sometimes your mouth says nothing, but your actions scream. You skip the call, slam the door, ghost the group chat, or you suddenly take that risky leap you know is going to mess something up, but you do it anyway. Why? Because talking about what you're feeling feels impossible, too vulnerable, too heavy, too real. So instead you act. That's what psychologists call acting out. When emotions that are too hard to name or express come out sideways through behavior, it's your feelings putting on a costume. And that costume, it often causes chaos. This isn't attention seeking, it's attention signaling. Your brain's like, hey, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'll show you. Take this. A teenager starts skipping school and mouthing off at everyone. Most people say they're being a brat. But dig a little deeper. Maybe their parents are going through a divorce. Maybe they feel invisible, unheard, terrified. They don't say, I'm scared. They act scared. Or a partner who's feeling neglected starts flirting with other people, not to cheat, but to be seen, to feel like they still matter to someone. They don't talk about the loneliness. They act on it. And yeah, acting out is often loud, dramatic, destructive. But under it, silence, not in the world, but inside the person. Because when we don't have the words, we use behavior as a translation tool. Sometimes it's impulsive spending. Sometimes it's picking a fight. Sometimes it's isolating self, sabotaging, or quitting something you care about without telling anyone why. Acting out is usually fast, reactive. like your emotions suddenly high, jacked the wheel and floored it. Here's the key, though it's not calculated. That's what makes it different from manipulation. Acting out isn't some master plan to hurt people or get revenge. It's a clumsy sauce. You're not trying to punish. You're trying to release. Because when you act out, it's often because the intensity inside you is too much to contain. You need somewhere for it to go. And let's be real. This starts young. A kid throws a tantrum. That's acting out. Not because they're bad, but because they're overwhelmed and can't articulate why. But adults do it too. Only now, the tantrums look different. Maybe you drink too much at a party when you're sad. Maybe you post that passive, aggressive meme when you're hurt. Maybe you start treating people coldly just to avoid admitting you feel rejected. We don't stop acting out just because we get older. We just get more socially acceptable at hiding the reasons. And here's where it gets tricky. Acting out feels good. In the moment, it feels like relief, like finally letting the pressure valve open after holding in steam for way too long. But afterward, regret, confusion, sometimes shame, because acting out doesn't solve the emotion. It just discharges it. The root is still there untouched. So what's the alternative? Do you just say what you feel? Yeah, but it's hard because acting out usually happens when words don't feel safe. Maybe you were taught that emotions are weakness. Maybe nobody ever modeled how to talk through feelings. Maybe you learned that being vulnerable gets you ignored, or worse, rejected. So instead, your emotions learn to perform. Not to heal, but to survive. But here's the reframe: acting out is data. It's not just bad behavior. It's emotional smoke signaling that something underneath needs attention. So next time you catch yourself doing something impulsive or uncharacteristic, pause. Ask yourself, what am I trying to say with this action? What feeling am I trying to get rid of right now? Sometimes, just identifying that feeling diffuses it. Like, I snapped at my partner because I felt unimportant. I bailed on plans because I felt insecure. I posted that because I wanted someone to ask if I'm okay. That kind of honesty doesn't come easy, but it's the bridge between reaction and reflection. And when you catch someone else acting out, try not to rush into judgment. That friend who keeps canceling, that coworker who's suddenly withdrawn, that sibling who's always starting drama. Ask what's not being said. Because underneath most acting out is a quiet version of, I don't know how to show you I'm hurting. I'm trying to feel better without knowing how. And yeah, it's messy. People get hurt. But when we start seeing behavior as a language, we stop just punishing the action and start hearing the emotion behind it. Acting out isn't about being reckless. It's about needing release. And the real healing happens when you stop just discharging the emotion and start decoding it. Because emotions that don't get expressed don't disappear. They just change shape. And sometimes, that shape is the version of you even you don't recognize. But if you can slow down, tune in, and give your feelings an actual voice, you don't need to act out. You can just speak up. Reversal. Ever find yourself being weirdly okay with something that should have wrecked you? Or maybe you look back on something painful and realize, wait, did I actually convince myself it wasn't that bad? That's reversal in action. A quiet, clever defense mechanism where your mind flips a painful emotion into its opposite, just to cope. Think of it like emotional judo. You're taking a heavy hit and redirecting it before it breaks you. Let's say someone humiliates you. You feel crushed, maybe even worthless. But instead of sitting in that, your brain pulls a whine out of you. I actually admire how bold they were. That was impressive, in a way. Or you're scared of abandonment, but instead of admitting that fear, you decide, I don't need anyone. I prefer being alone. Boom. Power reclaimed. Script flipped. It's survival, and it's smart in the short term. Because sometimes the real emotion, hurt, fear, humiliation, rage, feels like it'll swallow you whole. So your brain steps in like, hey, what if we just turned this into the opposite feeling? What if instead of feeling rejected, we felt superior? Instead of shame, pride. Instead of need, independence. And just like that, you're safe. Not healed, but safe. This isn't lying to yourself. It's more subtle than that. It's emotional shape shifting. You turn terror into control. You take something that made you feel small and convince yourself it made you strong. Let's break it down with a real, world example. Imagine a child with a distant, emotionally cold parent. They're never hugged, never praised, always walking on eggshells. That child can't just say, my parent doesn't love me. That truth is too devastating. So the brain flips it. They're strong. That's how love should look. I respect them. I want to be like them. And just like that, the child feels safe again. Fast forward 20 years, and that adult might idolize coldness. They might repeat the same pattern in relationships. Not because they're broken, because they learned to reframe pain as power. Or think about someone in an abusive relationship. They might tell themselves, they only yell because they care. I know how to handle them. Other people wouldn't understand. That's reversal too. Turning vulnerability into superiority. I'm strong enough to take it. But deep down, they're hurting. And that's the tricky part. Reversal doesn't erase the original emotion. It just buries it. The pain still lives under the surface, disguised, distorted, denied. So if reversal is so sneaky, how do you spot it? Look for emotional contradictions. Are you saying something feels good, but your body feels tense? Are you defending something that used to hurt you? Are you over something a little too fast? Like, I'm glad they left. Honestly, I feel lighter. But you haven't eaten in 2 days. You're snapping at people for no reason. You keep replaying old texts. Your words say one thing, but your nervous system's telling another story. That's a clue. Reversal is also common in trauma. Sometimes people feel guilt for being victims, so they flip it. It made me stronger. At least it taught me something. Which can be true, but not if it's used to deny the impact. Because growth and grief can coexist. You don't have to flip your pain into pride to earn the right to move forward. And sometimes, reversal shows up in how we treat others. You're afraid of being hurt, so you act cold first. You feel rejected, so you pretend you were never invested. You love someone, but mock them instead of showing it. Because flipping the script gives you the illusion of control, and control feels safer than honesty. But here's the quiet cost: disconnection from others, from your emotions, from yourself. So what's the alternative? It's not about ripping the reversal away. It's about noticing it, sitting with the original emotion that got flipped. Ask yourself, what's the opposite of what I'm saying right now? Is there a softer feeling underneath this armor? Maybe beneath the confidence is fear. Beneath the sarcasm, longing. Beneath the, I don't care, something tender that really, really does. And when you touch that emotion, yeah, it might hurt. But it'll also feel real. That's the thing about reversal. It numbs you, but it also disconnects you from clarity, from healing, from authenticity. So if you've been flipping pain into pride, need into independence, heartbreak into, I'm fine, maybe today's the day you let it flip back, even for just a second, because you don't need to perform toughness to earn survival. You're already surviving. And that original feeling, the one hiding underneath, it's not a threat, it's a signal. It's the part of you that still believes feeling something is safer than feeling nothing. And that's not weakness. That's the beginning of being whole. Magical thinking. Ever catch yourself thinking something totally irrational and still doing it anyway? Like you don't text someone back immediately and suddenly you're convinced you've jinxed the day. Or you knock on wood. Avoid walking under ladders. Wear your lucky hoodie to every important meeting. Why? Because some quiet voice in your head whispers, if I just do this, I'll stay safe. That's magical thinking, a psychological defense where we link unrelated things, like actions and outcomes, just to feel like we have control. It's superstition. It's ritual. It's the brain's way of saying, hey, the world feels overwhelming. Let me make it make sense. And it starts young. Kids do it all the time. They believe if they hold their breath for 10 seconds, they'll get a wish. Or if they sleep with a stuffed animal a certain way, their parents will stay safe. Because at that age, they don't have control. So their imagination builds a bridge between cause and effect. Even if it's not real, it feels real. But here's the kicker: adults do it too. We just get sneakier about it. Think of someone who compulsively checks their stove 5 times before leaving the house. Because, if I don't, something bad might happen. Or someone who wears a certain necklace to every job interview. Or writes, just in case, emails they never send, but feel safer knowing they exist. Magical thinking isn't about logic, it's about comfort. It's not, this makes sense. It's, this makes me feel less anxious. And in a chaotic world, that's pretty tempting. Here's where it gets even deeper. Magical thinking often shows up after trauma or loss. You lose someone you love, and suddenly your brain starts playing tricks. Maybe if I'd done this differently, they'd still be here. If I don't cry today, maybe nothing else bad will happen. It's not rational. It's emotional self-protection dressed up as control. Because magical thinking gives you the illusion that your actions matter. Even when you know they don't. There's a study that showed people under extreme stress, like soldiers in combat or families in crisis, often develop small rituals, tiny habits repeated obsessively. They're not random, they're anchors. Proof that some part of life is still predictable. Magical thinking also shows up in relationships. Like, if I don't tell them how much I care, they'll stay longer. Or, if I'm always the good one, no one will leave. It's the hope that emotion can bend reality. That if you just believe hard enough, behave right enough, you can keep bad things from happening. But here's the hard truth: magical thinking is born out of powerlessness. It's what we reach for when the world stops making sense. When the pain's too big, the loss too real, the fear too sharp. And in that moment, creating little rules, even if they're invisible, is how we survive. Some examples. Someone walking to a hospital room counts every step, not because they believe the steps will heal anyone, but because they need to do something. Action feels better than helplessness. Or someone with anxiety imagines the worst case scenario constantly, believing that preparing for it will keep it from happening. That's magical thinking too. If I obsess over the bad thing, maybe I can stop it. Even grief can be laced with it. If I light a candle every night, maybe they can feel it. If I wear this shirt, maybe I'll stay connected. And honestly, that doesn't make you silly. It makes you human, because magical thinking isn't a flaw. It's a response to uncertainty, to loss, to pain. But like all defense mechanisms, it comes with a cost. If you rely on it too much, it can trap you. You start avoiding things, just in case. You feel responsible for outcomes that have nothing to do with you. You put the weight of the world on your rituals, your habits, your imaginary if-then rules, and that's heavy. So what do you do instead? You notice it. Not to shame it, but to see it. Because most magical thinking lives in the background, whispering stories that sound like, if I just do this one thing, nothing bad will happen. When you hear that voice, pause. Ask, what feeling am I trying to avoid? What would happen if I didn't follow this rule today? Is this about control or fear? And if it is fear, let that be okay. Fear doesn't need a ritual to be valid. You don't need to prove you're worried enough for your feelings to count. Sometimes, it helps to swap the ritual for a real coping tool. Instead of the lucky sock, a grounding breath. Instead of avoiding the cracks in the sidewalk, a moment of mindfulness. Not to erase the emotion, but to face it with clarity. And if you still want to knock on wood or whisper a quiet, please, to the universe, that's fine. As long as you remember your safety doesn't live in superstition. It lives in your ability to sit with uncertainty and still choose presence. Magical thinking is how we try to protect ourselves with stories, but healing begins when we learn to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when we're scared. So step on the crack, wear the other hoodie, say the hard thing, and trust that life doesn't run on secret rules, but on your growing ability to meet the unknown without flinching.